Hello everyone, Omni-sensei here with What If I Were Reborn in MHA as DABI, Part 6. If you enjoy this content, smash the like button. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story, linked in the description.
Next day noon. The coffee he was carrying had been cold for 40 minutes. But DABI held it anyway, because he wasn't in the commercial district to have a coffee. From the third-floor railing of Kiyoshi Ward Shopping Mall, he had a clean sightline to the food court below, where Class 1A had scattered across half a dozen tables. Midoriya was currently dragging himself toward a clothing store with Uraraka. Ida was saying something to Tokoyami that was almost certainly schedule-related. I am either the most dedicated teacher in Japan, DABI thought, or I need professional help. The answer to his own question, do I really stalk a bunch of teenagers just in case a memory from another life comes true? He had apparently been, yes, because the alternative was doing nothing, and doing nothing was worse. He had been surveilling Midoriya for a couple of days. The plot had changed because of his involvement. Butterfly effects he couldn't fully map, variables shifted by proximity, and most importantly, his not-so-strong memory. He wants to account for any of these reasons for his failures again. The sequence that hadn't happened already happened. The growth of the students was fast-forwarded. The Koji Koda incident was the perfect example of how things could change drastically, and even his own house getting attacked had confirmed it. Honestly, he never bet things on his memory or plot from the beginning. Anyway, coming to the present situation and what was about to come, he has quite a few things he is uncertain about. All he knew was that it was supposed to happen somewhere around the last episode of the first season, and it was supposed to happen in a shopping district. The second and first one-on-one meetings between the successors of One for All and All for One. It was meant to happen today. However, will it happen? He would be pretty disappointed if it didn't. I mean, the chance of eliminating the villain once and for all. He couldn't ignore the scenario even if those chances of success were almost non-existent for the rat to get away again. Still, DABI's worries of Tamura Shigaraki not coming were not without any reason. In the first place, the proceeding of their meeting was triggered by a specific chain of circumstances that no longer happened in this world. And it's all linked to Stain. More specifically, it had required Stain's ideology. The particular mythology the hero killer had generated in the original timeline and the way his actions had crystallized something in the public consciousness that Shigaraki, for all his destruction, had never managed. Stain had never been part of the League of Villains' relationship with Tamura Shigaraki. That was a media invention, a speculative connection that had calcified into assumed fact. In reality, Shigaraki hated Stain. His resentment was due to jealousy of someone who had worked harder and received less attention. The tantrum of a child who couldn't understand why his destruction was invisible while someone else's was legendary. The question it had driven him to ask Midoriya, what is the difference between me and Stain? Was the question of that resentment looking for an answer it could use? But Stain had never become the hero killer here. DABI had changed that. Shigaraki had no mythology to envy, comparison to make, or particular reason to seek out All Might's successor beyond the basic fact of succession. And yet DABI's gut said the confrontation was coming anyway. He had learned, through considerable personal cost, to trust that. His phone buzzed. Kamui Woods. In position. East entrance. He pocketed it. The confirmation was sufficient. Despite his doubts, the preparations had been quite thorough from DABI's side. He contacted the heroes who were already accustomed to his style of functioning and with whom he had built some level of understanding from his underground hero work. Kamui was one amongst them. The pro-hero had agreed based on DABI's track record and a donation to his agency that had been generous in the way that made questions unnecessary. Clean arrangement, and nobody had asked what they weren't being told. If nothing happened today, he was a paranoid teacher with too much money and a surveillance hobby. He could live with that outcome. DABI's eyes moved across the shopping district. The students from Class 1A had arrived at the location. On the east side of the food court was a lone person, amongst the people who were walking in pairs or more. Also, he has dark hair. His posture is slightly hunched, and he wears a simple t-shirt and pants. DABI recognized the profile a full second before he registered why. He smiled at his cold coffee cup. Stain had no idea he was being smiled at, which was fine. He was busy scanning his surroundings while making sure he was not seen. He had been told by his boss a villain attack was possible, and apart from that, nothing else, which, from anyone other than DABI, would have been sufficient reason to leave the mission immediately and possibly leave violently. Instead, he was in a shopping mall watching teenagers talking about boring stuff. SK, is this how the present generation shops? He couldn't help but wonder. Stain's mind drifted to his past, more specifically his childhood. That is, he could actually call it that. Growing up, he didn't spend much time being a child. More like, there wasn't much worth spending time on, nor the luxury of having to remain immature. It was the same traumatizing upbringing, the usual catalog of things that happened to children when the adults around them were operating at their worst. A younger sibling who hadn't made it, days that ended with hunger, and the gradual construction of a self from whatever materials were left over after everything else had been taken. All Might had been the constant through all of it, not on a personal level. Stain had never met him and had no particular claim on him as anything other than a symbol. But the symbol had been real, and it had been enough for a long time to keep him from crossing a line he had been approaching for years. He had been very close to that line when DABI found him. He still wasn't entirely sure how to characterize what had happened in that first conversation. He had said what he believed. The framework he had built his entire understanding of himself around, the philosophy that justified what he was and what he intended to become. Good and evil are different sides of the same coin. Whatever I am doing is a necessary evil. DABI had laughed at this statement of his, and it was the most sinister laugh he had seen, even worse than his. When it finished, he had looked at Stain with an expression, a disappointment of someone who had expected better and was genuinely let down by the gap. That someone being me, Stain had thought at the time, which had not made sense and had lodged itself in him anyway. That's a bit disappointing, DABI had said. I thought you at least were living in the same world as me. Instead, you've built yourself a cage and decided it's a worldview. Stain had said nothing, which was the response of someone who was listening despite themselves. The coin thing, DABI continued. I need you to understand that some second-rate villain made that up so they could sleep at night. It's not philosophy but permission. The distance between good and evil isn't the thickness of a coin. It's the distance between the sky and the ocean floor, between a cloud and the ground. There's no in-between. Evil is evil. A motive doesn't reclassify it. An ideology doesn't reclassify it. Nothing does. Stain had looked at him carefully after that. The words themselves were unambiguous. The moral structure behind them was clear, the logic internally consistent, and the person delivering them fully aware that none of it absolved them personally. There was no performance in it, no attempt to preserve a cleaner self-image, just someone stating a truth while understanding exactly what it cost to say it aloud. A hypocrite, technically. Except that didn't fit either. Hypocrisy required pretense, and this was something else. A person who understood the full weight of what they were, chose it anyway, and refused to soften the choice into something easier to live with. The clarity wasn't absolute. It was simply clarity, existing beside the thing it condemned without trying to resolve the contradiction. For reasons Stain found deeply irritating, that felt more honest than most things he had encountered. Which was why he was now sitting in a shopping mall food court in civilian clothes, monitoring for a villain attack on a timeline he hadn't been told, and waiting for signals from a man who had smiled into his coffee cup from 3 floors above. He hated this, and he kept watching anyway. Most of Class 1A had descended on Kiyoshi Ward Shopping Mall. Right after their arrival, The group didn't waste any time and had dissolved into smaller pairs. And once that was finished, a few decided to go off individually for their personal shopping. Midoriya and Uraraka had ended up together in the general goods section, walking aimlessly. "I want to buy some wrist weights," Midoriya said, checking his list. "A bit heavier. My current set isn't giving enough resistance for the new training regimen." He looked at her. "What about you, Uraraka?" Uraraka opened her mouth to answer and made the mistake of looking at him directly. The blush arrived with the subtlety of a fire alarm. "Bug repellent," she said very quickly. "I need to go find it, and it's probably in a different section. I will meet you later. Bye." She was gone before Midoriya had finished processing the exchange. He stood in the general goods aisle and looked at the space where she had been. Then he looked at his list. Heavy wrist weights. He found the sporting goods section without difficulty, and was in the process of comparing two options. No way. Izuku Midoriya? The man who called him was hooded, face mostly obscured, making him mysterious. However, the atmosphere around him seemed contrary, and so did his body language. "I recognized you from the UA Sports Festival," the man said, moving around to face him. "I watched the whole thing, and you were incredible." He paused. "And then you also saved those kids from the orphanage from that Nomu attack. I couldn't believe it when I heard." Midoriya smiled reflexively, the automatic social response, and then it stopped. He replayed the sentence. The orphanage kids? The sports festival was public, and his performance there was aired on television and even saved across every hero analysis platform in the country. That wasn't the part that had stopped him. The orphanage incident, and especially his and his friends' involvement, wasn't public knowledge. The responding officer had been explicit about the details being managed, and civilian exposure was minimized with the specifics not for public circulation. So how did this man know? Maybe it was someone from the orphanage itself, a staff member, someone with a legitimate connection who had heard through a channel he hadn't considered. Midoriya ran through the possibilities in the 2 seconds he had before the man stepped closer, and the proximity registered in an entirely different way. Not recognition, but a particular alarm that bypassed the analytical brain and went straight to the part that was older and faster and less interested in charitable interpretations. He stepped back, created distance, and kept his expression even. "You're unnecessarily sharp, Midoriya." The voice changed when it said this, and in the movement of turning, in the fraction of a second where the hood shifted and the angle changed, Midoriya got a partial view of the face underneath. He had seen that face before. Even though it wasn't one-on-one and was from quite afar, he could never forget the man who orchestrated the USJ attack. In particular, the dead give away a hand covering his face. Shigaraki. Few minutes earlier, 3 floors up, DABI's coffee cup hit the table harder than intended. He had been watching and tracking student movements through the mall with the kind of paranoid vigilance that came from knowing the League of Villains patterns too well. There, a hooded figure approaching Midoriya. DABI was already on his feet, phone out, thumb moving to Kamui Wood's contact before the cup finished rattling. Kamui had one job: evacuate bystanders in one clean sweep the moment things went hot. Stain had a different role: to eliminate or restrain the main target. That was why DABI hadn't moved immediately or reacted the second Tamura Shigaraki appeared. He was waiting for Stain to get into position and for every piece to align before triggering the trap. He also trusted Midoriya not to drop his guard around a stranger, and even from this distance, DABI could see the subtle change in his posture, proving that trust had been justified. The preparation was finished, and all that remained was timing. Below, Shigaraki understood his cover was blown as Midoriya already recognized him, so he decided to go for Plan B, and it was simple. Shigaraki's hand was already moving toward Midoriya's neck, this time with force, as killing intent came off him in waves that DABI could feel from the 3rd floor railing. Midoriya's shoulders tensed, his body already shifting into a fighting stance, and the first person to move was Stain. The specially made shuriken left his hand with lethal precision, aimed at Shigaraki's neck. The villain tried to dodge at the last second and managed to avoid the fatal strike but couldn't completely evade it. The blade kissed his cheek and it was enough. The shuriken returned to Stain's hand, and then he licked the blood from the blade without hesitation. His quirk activated. Shigaraki's body was paralyzed, but he wouldn't understand that for another 2 seconds, and in that small interval, 2 things happened simultaneously. First, Kamui Wood's quirk exploded through the east entrance like a forest deciding to relocate. Immediately, massive branches shot upward and outward, not attacking, but creating instant barriers, sectioning off the crowd, and establishing clear zones and escape routes with precision that only came from extensive disaster response training. Second, before the barriers could completely form, DABI vaulted the 3rd floor railing. His signature blue flames erupted from his feet, controlling his descent and adjusting trajectory mid-fall with surgical precision, and he landed exactly where he needed to be, directly in front of Shigaraki's face. His flame-covered fist was already moving, a full power strike aimed to drive Shigaraki's head straight through the floor, the kind of impact that would shatter concrete for 50 meters in every direction. You... Shigaraki's eyes widened as DABI's hand closed in, just centimeters from his face. He tried to move but couldn't, and only then he realized his body wouldn't respond to commands, paralyzed by Stain's quirk activating in his bloodstream. Doesn't matter, Shigaraki thought with vicious satisfaction. Whoever touched me is turning to dust, but DABI's hand was covered in flames. Blue fire that burned hot enough to prevent physical contact, creating a thermal barrier that would vaporize skin before decay could activate. A point-blank attack. Just death incoming at the speed of superheated combustion. If this had happened a month ago, DABI wouldn't have pushed this hard from the start or committed such lethal force so immediately. But he was pissed. This bastard had tried to target his family, had gotten close to his apartment, and forced DABI to feel that cold, sickening fear that came with realizing the people he cared about were vulnerable. That anger had been inside him all this time, controlled but not extinguished. So he had decided no more holding back. This attack might not kill Shigaraki. The man had surprising durability, but it would definitely leave him half dead at minimum. 1 inch away from contact, DABI's spider sense screamed a warning that made his teeth ache. He twisted mid-attack, using his flames to alter trajectory, throwing himself sideways with everything he had. A hand emerged from a purple void that hadn't existed a heartbeat before. Fingers reached out and would have touched DABI's shoulder, his neck, something vital. Instead, they closed on empty air as DABI rolled away, already reigniting flames for a second strike. You dodged that? The voice from the void carried genuine surprise. Impressive reaction speed. DABI didn't need to see his face to recognize that voice. All for one, he said quietly, body coiled and ready. The surprise in the void intensified. Oh, so you do know about me. Did All Might tell you? Pause, considering. How interesting. You're not what I expected, DABI. Or perhaps should I refer to you as Toya Todoroki? Around them, the mall had descended into chaos. Kamui's wooden barriers contained civilians in sectioned-off areas. People pressed against the barriers trying to see what was happening. Stain was there too, helping control the crowd with sharp commands and an expression that suggested anyone who panicked would regret it. What the hell? A civilian woman screamed. Is that a villain attack? Everyone stay calm. Kamui's voice boomed from the entrance. Heroes are responding. Please move toward the marked exits in an orderly. Quiet. Stain's voice sliced through the panic. You want to be a hero? Act like it. Move. Now. No screaming or running. Just move. The civilians, shocked by the sheer authority in his voice, actually obeyed. Meanwhile, in the center of the combat zone, DABI and All for One stood face-to-face across 15 meters of evacuated floor space. Midoriya still didn't register what exactly was happening here, but One for All was already crackling across his body at 35%. Ready to intervene but smart enough to recognize this was beyond his current capabilities. Shigaraki was still paralyzed, rage and frustration evident on his frozen face. And DABI smiled, cold, sharp, and absolutely furious. He was actually aiming for the small fish, but who knows, he might have caught a whale instead. Kiyoshi Ward Shopping Mall. Central Food Court. DABI let a cold smile pull at his mouth. He came here hunting a stray dog and wound up catching the devil himself. All for one. The guy was either losing his mind, getting desperate, or DABI's setup had worked a lot better than he gave it credit for. Inside the wooden dome Kamui Woods had thrown up, Midoriya tried to make his brain catch up to his eyes. First, Shigaraki was stuck to the floor, paralyzed by Stain's quirk. Second, DABI appeared out of nowhere with killing intent. And then there was the hand reaching out of the purple mist, the same teleportation quirk from USJ, but the presence behind it was different. Throughout the proceedings, Midoriya had been a fraction of a second away from dying. What the hell? He didn't usually swear, but this time the words just fell out of his mouth. Through the gaps in the timber, people pushed against each other trying to see the courtyard. "Is that the guy from the UA?" Someone shouted. "The teacher with the fire? Who's he fighting? I can't see. The wood is blocking." A news crew was already shuffling their equipment around the perimeter, and a reporter pushed her earpiece in and spoke rapidly into a microphone. "This is Akane Yamamoto reporting from Kiyoshi Ward Mall. Pro-hero Kamui Woods has established an evacuation perimeter, and UA instructor DABI is currently engaging an unidentified hostile in the main plaza. The situation is developing rapidly." 3 floors up, Uraraka fumbled her limited edition All Might figure. "What?" Uraraka said. Ida waved his hands in the air. "Everyone needs to maintain order. This is an active villain scenario, and we need to let the professionals handle." Deku was right there. Uraraka grabbed the edge of the railing and pointed at the plaza below. "I just saw him." Kirishima hopped on his toes, trying to see over a thick wooden branch. "I can't see anything, but that blue fire is definitely DABI-sensei." Yaoyorozu stood very still, phone already out. Kirishima tried to move toward the scene. Ida grabbed his shoulder and hauled him back. "Don't do that. Kamui Woods established these barriers for civilian safety." Yaoyorozu was already calling. "I am contacting the police. Even if heroes are responding, they need backup and..." She paused, listening. "They're already on their way." Someone else called it in. Uraraka pressed her hands against the rough bark of the barrier, trying to peer through the narrow gaps between the branches as flashes of blue fire lit the edges of a swirling purple void in the plaza. "Please be okay, Deku," he thought desperately. "Please." Down in the plaza, DABI stared at the hand reaching out of the purple mist. "I freaking hate teleportation villains," he muttered. He was already getting ready to attack again, flames building in intensity. Indeed, All for One's voice came from the void, carrying dark amusement. Being on the receiving end of a spatial quirk user is quite annoying, isn't it? DABI kept his eyes on the mist. "Midoriya, I trust you can take care of yourself." The statement carried an unspoken instruction. Stay out of the crossfire. Midoriya had been struggling to breathe properly since the mist opened, and the sheer pressure coming off that portal felt like cinder blocks resting on his chest. In a way, both successor candidates were in shock now. Midoriya had never met this man face to face, but his instincts, amplified by the echoes of the previous users residing within him, screamed a singular, terrifying name. But DABI's words snapped Midoriya out of it. He took a defensive stance, one for all crackling across his body at 35%. I can handle myself, Midoriya said, his voice steadier than he felt. DABI didn't bother continuing the conversation. He drew the flames inward until a dense, white-hot layer wrapped around his knuckles, the sudden surge in temperature cracking the tiles beneath his boots. Then he moved straight at Tamura Shigaraki, blue fire compressing around his hands into something almost solid, heat intense enough to warp the air and fracture the nearby floor from sheer thermal stress. If All for One wanted to intervene, he would have to fully commit, expose himself, risk. Let's not rush things, All for One said. The space between DABI and the downed villain is distorted, and a massive wall of compressed air is released from the mist. Air Cannon, one of All for One's most versatile stolen quirks, allowed him to store air pressure and release it as devastating concussive blasts. The attack came from an angle DABI hadn't anticipated, the air compression creating a visible distortion before detonating. But DABI's spider sense gave him a fraction of a second of warning, that familiar tingling at the edge of his senses that always came just before danger struck. He twisted mid-lunge, recognizing the pattern from fighting similar quirks before. Instead of being knocked away, he used his flames to create a counterpressure, surfing the edge of the shockwave to actually accelerate his approach rather than slow it. His flame-wreathed fist continued toward Shigaraki's face. Inside the portal, All for One, recognizing the attack couldn't be fully stopped, immediately activated defensive measures. He activated Kinetic Booster on Shigaraki's body, a quirk that dramatically enhanced physical durability by reinforcing cellular structure against impact. It was like wrapping someone in invisible armor that specifically countered kinetic energy. At the same time, All for One layered Multiplier over it, a quirk capable of exponentially amplifying the effects of other abilities. In this case, multiplying the defensive enhancement of Kinetic Booster by several factors. The combination should have made Shigaraki's body tough enough to withstand even professional hero-level strikes with minimal damage. Should have. All for One had been calculated based on DABI's displayed strength during the sports festival and USJ incident. He had calculated what he believed were sufficient defensive measures and underestimated them. DABI's knuckles connected with Shigaraki's jaw. A Kinetic Booster quirk absorbed part of the impact, preventing Tamura Shigaraki's head from literally exploding on contact. But DABI's raw physical strength, enhanced by 100% super soldier integration, the arachnid genome, and sun breathing all funneled into one strike. The blue fire collided with the kinetic barrier, and the invisible armor held for a fraction of a second before giving way entirely. Teeth snapped and flew across the courtyard. The punch continued through, slamming Shigaraki's face into the concrete floor with enough impact to spiderweb the ground in a 3-meter radius. Blue fire washed over Shigaraki's skin. The villain made a ruined, choking sound as the heat burned through his shirt. The shear system shock flooded Shigaraki's body with adrenaline. It burned right through the paralysis stain's quirk. Blood curdle. It hurts, Shigaraki choked out. He dragged himself backward, his hands slipping in his own blood. He scrambled away from DABI, his limbs thrashing. Master! Master! He is trying to kill me. Why is everyone? Tamura, be silent. All for One's voice lacked its previous amusement. 2 high-tier defensive quirks hadn't been enough to protect his student from a single punch, and now the boy was crawling on the floor, bleeding and pleading in front of an enemy. So he tried to instigate something else. All for One's voice drifted out of the purple mist. You're not what I expected, DABI. Or perhaps should I refer to you as Toya Todoroki? The voice from the void echoed, calm, polite, and dripping with condescension. Call me whatever you want. DABI drawled, his voice a flat, freezing blade that sliced straight through the suffocating pressure. It's not going to matter much when I burn your vocal cords out. All for One chuckled, a rich, deep sound that made Midoriya's stomach twist. Dr. Garaki was right to be fascinated by your recovery. You were a broken, dying thing when we found you, a vessel that couldn't even contain its own heat. And yet, here you stand, daring to go against me. I must admit, I am profoundly curious to dissect how you've achieved such a masterpiece of a body. You want to dissect me? DABI's lips curved into a jagged, lethal smile. Come and try. I have been itching to repay you for the 3 years of rent I didn't ask for. Again, a brief wave of disappointment registered in All for One's thoughts. If only it was him. This one possesses the will, strength, and ruthlessness that Tamura lacks. He shook off the thought. Tamura was his chosen successor. He just needed more hardening and more trials. All for One attacked without warning. He didn't aim at DABI but targeted Midoriya. Hurting All Might's successor would send a much better message to his old nemesis. Air cannon activated again, but this time at full power instead of the restrained version used to intercept DABI. The air compressed violently in a massive sphere, All for One storing the maximum amount of atmospheric pressure his quirk could contain. Then he released it and the shockwave erupted with enough force to level buildings. The compressed air expanded at supersonic speed, creating a visible distortion wave that screamed toward Midoriya. With that speed and power, dodging was nearly impossible for a first-year student. But even if Midoriya somehow managed to evade, the attack was so powerful it would shatter Kamui Wood's barrier behind him, and the expanding shockwave would hit every civilian sheltering there with lethal force. So there was no choice. Midoriya couldn't dodge, and he had to stand his ground and take the hit. Midoriya braced himself, every muscle tensing as he activated One for All at 40%. Pushing past his normal safe limit, green lightning crackling across his entire body. Black whip erupted from both arms simultaneously, the dark tendrils wrapping around his forearms like reinforced gauntlets. Additional tendrils shot into the ground, anchoring him to the concrete like guy wires on a tower. I can take this and I have to. The air cannon. Blast approached, air compressing so violently it was visible, reality itself distorting. DABI appeared in front of him. When did he move? The air cannon hit DABI at full force. The shockwave was designed to destroy buildings, to obliterate anything in its path through pure devastation. All for One had put genuine power behind the strike, not holding back, genuinely trying to kill. DABI crossed his arms in an X-guard position, blue flames erupting to maximum intensity around his body. The fire didn't stop the full force. It couldn't really, since air cannon was pure pressure, but it created a thermal barrier that disrupted the airflow, reducing the attack's cohesion slightly. The shockwave hit. DABI's feet carved deep trenches in the concrete as he was pushed backward. The force enormous even for his enhanced durability. His arms took the brunt of the impact. Blood vessels burst in his forearms from the pressure, but his accelerated healing was already working to repair the damage. He held the position for 3 seconds of sustained force. When the shockwave finally dissipated, DABI remained standing, arms shaking slightly. 10 feet behind him, Midoriya hadn't been touched. The timber barricades holding the civilians were completely unharmed. DABI looked back over his shoulder, expression unreadable beneath the pain he was suppressing. "What did I say?" he asked. He sounded incredibly tired. "I told you to try not to get in the way. Why do you always decide to play hero when you are nowhere near ready yet?" Midoriya opened his mouth. He raised a hand, pointing vaguely at the barricades to explain about the people sheltering there. "Don't answer," DABI said as he turned his back on the boy and faced the purple portal again. "I already know why. Because you are a brat with a hero complex and zero sense of self-preservation. You are exactly like your mentor." He turned back to face All for One's void, rolling his shoulders despite the pain in his arms. "But here is the thing about playing hero before you are ready." Blue flames erupted across his entire body again. temperature spiking to levels that made the air shimmer and the remaining concrete floor tiles crack from thermal stress. You force the adults to clean up your mess, and unlike your other teachers, I am not very patient in cleaning up others' messes. His flames intensified further, shifting from blue to white at the core. So stay behind me, Midoriya. Just watch and learn. This is what it actually looks like when someone's ready to fight this battle. The temperature continued rising, heat waves visible now, the mall's sprinkler system activating in futile response. And all for one, for the first time in decades, felt something almost like concern. This DABI wasn't just strong. He tanked a full-power air cannon, something that should have killed or severely injured even experienced pro heroes, and was still standing. Interesting, all for one thought. The temperature continued rising, and all for one, for the first time in decades, felt something almost like concern. DABI's eyes focused again on the purple mist, cutting through the distortion to where he knew Shigaraki and all for one's connection existed. Are you truly seeking a fight here? All for one's voice carried dark amusement. As you've seen, you don't stand a chance against me. Yeah. DABI's tone was sharp, mocking. If that's how it is, stop spouting bullshit while hiding behind a hole like a rat. A light pause from the void. Can't come out. DABI continued relentlessly. Still recovering from getting beaten like a ragged dog by All Might 6 years ago, the temperature around him spiked another 10 degrees, flames flickering with barely contained aggression. You really have a talent for provoking anger with just words, All for One said, his voice still controlled but carrying an edge now. But unfortunately, I am not in the mood to reply to childish taunts. Should I arrange a proper bed and breakfast next time so you can get in the mood? DABI's grin was vicious. For damn's sake, just admit you're sweating bullets, you scared dog. Each word was like a slap across All for One's face. In over a century of existence, across countless bloody battles and encounters with generations of heroes who had tried and failed to stop him, All for One had never been insulted so directly. He had faced righteous fury, desperate screams, and heroic declarations, but never such contemptuous, mocking disregard for his absolute power. Even in the back, Midoriya felt that DABI might be taking it too far. For a single, agonizing second, everyone in the entire commercial district, from the paralyzed Tamura Shigaraki to the civilians cowering behind the wooden barricades, felt something shift. It was a sinister, suffocating presence that transcended physical space. It felt as though the fabric of reality itself was being violently torn open, like something ancient, bottomless, and unimaginably malevolent had suddenly focused its absolute attention on this exact coordinate. The sensation was suffocating, oppressive, and crushing. Several civilians dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by pure instinctive terror. Congratulations! All for One's voice had changed completely, cold and devoid of amusement, carrying a weight that made the air itself feel heavier. You've managed to push me, DABI. You're no longer just a nuisance but a target that needs to be eliminated. Outside the combat zone, Stain sensed it a fraction of a second faster than anyone else. The man who had faced down dozens of pro heroes without a single ounce of hesitation looked down at his own hand. It was trembling. Just what kind of being is DABI facing there? Stain thought, his blood running cold as he stood guard over the panicking crowd. The students who had been watching from their positions also felt the horror wash over them, and this was just mere presence, not even a direct attack. It was just All for One's raw, unadulterated anger manifesting as a tangible, crushing pressure. For a second, the entire Kiyoshi ward went dead silent. However, inside the combat zone, damn, he is the real deal, DABI thought. His arachnid genome was firing blindly, screaming at his nervous system about an existential threat that defied the physical world. Yet, through sheer, stubborn will and his breathing technique, He forced his exterior to remain perfectly, mockingly still. He didn't give the monster in the void the satisfaction of seeing him flinch. No wonder All Might struggled against this guy. Just how many people did he kill? Just as suddenly as it had appeared, the presence vanished. A long sigh emanated from the purple mist, and everything returned to normal. To get worked up over simple provocation, All for One's voice had returned to its usual controlled tone. His attention shifted to Shigaraki. The pale, white-haired successor was still paralyzed on the shattered concrete, barely conscious and drenched in his own blood. Pathetic. All for One mused in disappointment. My successor allowed himself to be injured so severely by a single opponent. And I allowed myself to lose my composure over mere insults from a child. The void expanded rapidly, purple mist swallowing Shigaraki's form. We will have to continue this conversation another time, DABI? All for One said, his voice fading into the spatial distortion. I look forward to our next encounter. DABI stared at the collapsing portal, his turquoise eyes narrowing into lethal slits. There was absolutely no way he was letting them escape cleanly. Capturing Shigaraki was impossible. This he was aware of, at least. All for One would protect his successor at all costs, and the villain was already halfway through the portal. But there was someone else that was far more important in the long run. Kurogyri, the teleportation quirk user, a living gateway who made all of the League of Villains' teleportation tactics possible. Kurogyri was the undisputed key to their mobility, their untraceable escape routes, and their terrifying ability to strike anywhere in the country without warning. If he could sever that logistical lifeline, the League would be crippled. DABI closed his eyes for just a second, letting his spider sense expand to maximum range. There, he found it. Kurogyri's actual body, the core that maintained the portal, was positioned exactly where DABI's enhanced senses told him it would be. But getting to him before the gate snapped shut required flawless, instantaneous coordination. Midoriya, DABI said quickly, not taking his eyes off the closing portal. When I give the signal, aim for the marked point and use Black Whip. Don't hesitate. He didn't wait for an answer. It's not like there was enough time to explain. DABI drove forward immediately, committing to the attack with everything he had. He didn't aim the punch at Shigaraki. At the exact same moment, a tiny, needle-like arrow made of compressed blue flame shot off to the side from DABI's left hand. Midoriya saw it instantly. There, without hesitation, Black Whip erupted from his arms, tendrils shooting toward the marked location with everything he had. The whips hit something with resistance. Midoriya's eyes widened in realization as he commanded the whips to wrap around the invisible target completely, anchoring tight, before yanking backward with the crushing enhanced torque of One for All. Meanwhile, DABI's fist penetrated the portal. Then something else happened. His spider sense pinged a warning. A pulling sensation, like fingers reaching into his quirk factor itself, trying to grasp something fundamental. He's trying to steal my quirk. All for One's hand had caught DABI's wrist inside the portal, and the villain was attempting to take Blue Flame through direct contact. DABI could feel an invasive, sickening pressure bypassing his skin, his muscles, and his veins, reaching directly into the fundamental architecture of his DNA. But then, nothing happened. The pulling sensation hit some kind of barrier, something that prevented the theft from completing. All for One's quirk, which had stolen hundreds of abilities over a century, couldn't grasp this one. DABI too instantly felt the failure. Obviously, he didn't know the reason, but he is in a situation not to press too much about it. All he knew is that he was protected against it. Definitely good to know for future reference. The void snapped shut violently, cutting off the connection. DABI drew his fist back slowly, blood smeared across his knuckles. Someone else's, not his own. I hit him, right? He muttered. examining the blood with satisfaction. Behind him, Midoriya had succeeded in his task. Black Whip retracted violently, and there, caught in the dark tendrils like a fish in a net, was Kurogiri. The misty villain struggled, trying to activate his warping quirk to escape, but Midoriya's tendrils were wrapped too tightly. The physical body at Kurogiri's core couldn't generate the concentration needed for spatial manipulation while being constricted. Got him. DABI turned, surveying the captured villain with cold satisfaction. Good work. He walked over to where Midoriya held Kurogiri suspended. Now let's have a nice chat with this guy. Flames flickered around DABI's hands. You and I are going to have a very interesting conversation, DABI said quietly. About your employer, League's plans, and about your real identity. He leaned in closer, voice dropping to something almost gentle, which somehow made it more threatening. Kurogiri said nothing, but the mist forming his body rippled with what might have been fear. Around them, the mall was in chaos. The initial terror had broken. Civilians, guided by Kamui Woods and Stain, were now evacuating properly through the shattered east entrances. But in this moment, in the center of what had been a battlefield, DABI stood over his captured prize with grim satisfaction. He looked up toward where he knew cameras were recording. Aizawa might be watching, right? The masterpiece was complete, and it was beautiful. Outside the combat zone, the mall had descended into controlled chaos. Kamui's wooden barriers were still up, blocking civilians' view of what had just transpired. Other heroes were already in motion, establishing a perimeter, initiating evacuation protocols, and coordinating the response with practiced efficiency. The purple void had vanished completely, blue flames extinguished, and the wooden barriers remained, but the immediate threat was gone. Kamui Woods received a single message on his phone. Just an emoji from DABI. Thumbs up. Relief flooded through him. Mission accomplished and threat neutralized. Kamui's voice boomed over the chaos, amplified by the natural acoustics of his wooden structures. The immediate threat has been neutralized. Please continue moving toward exits in an orderly fashion. Police are en route and will need to secure the scene. As Kamui Woods slowly lowered the barriers, giving the students and civilians a clearer view of the plaza, they saw DABI walking toward Midoriya, who still looked completely shell-shocked. And there, on the ground between them, was a purple, misty form, Kurogiri, wrapped in what remained of Midoriya's black whip, completely neutralized and unconscious. The crowd noise increased exponentially. What was that? Did anyone get video? Is it over? Where's the villain? Did he escape? The news crew was going wild, their reporter speaking rapidly into the camera. We've just witnessed what appears to have been a villain attack stopped by pro-hero DABI. Viewers may recognize him from both the UA Sports Festival and the recent Nomu incident. The attacker appears to have escaped using some kind of teleportation quirk, though authorities have not yet confirmed the details. There, Uraraka pointed, voice tight with concern. Deku seems okay, and DABI-sensei's with him, but who is that? Is that the same thing from USJ? Kirishima demanded, recognition dawning. The mist that teleported villains. Are they the ones behind this attack too? Ida's eyes were fixed on the scene with tactical precision. Midoriya looks pale. It was true. While Midoriya had managed to execute what DABI instructed, caught up in the heat of the moment, moving on instinct and trust, now that everything was over, the adrenaline rush was washing away. The reality of what had just happened was hitting him like a physical weight. He stumbled slightly, caught himself, and DABI was there immediately to steady him with a hand on his shoulder. That was... Midoriya couldn't finish the sentence. All for one, DABI confirmed, keeping his own voice level and steady. The man who nearly killed All Might 6 years ago, the monster who's been manipulating hero society from the shadows for over a century. He paused, making sure Midoriya was listening despite the shock. And also the one you might have to fight one day. Midoriya's eyes widened, green irises dilating with renewed fear at the implication. DABI placed both hands on Midoriya's shoulders, forcing direct eye contact. Engrave that fear into your heart, Midoriya. Never forget the feeling. The feeling of being completely helpless, of knowing death was one touch away. Hold on to it, because if you let it, that fear will force you to grow stronger. His voice dropped lower, more intense. Because next time, I may not be there to shield you from it, DABI continued. And if that happens, it will just be you standing in front of him. When that day comes, being physically strong won't be enough. You need to be mentally prepared too. Midoriya nodded shakily, still processing. Kamui and Stain began establishing a proper perimeter around the captured Kurogiri. In the distance, sirens announced the police response getting closer. Stay put for now, DABI instructed, releasing Midoriya's shoulders. The police are going to want statements, so answer their questions honestly and don't leave anything important out. He paused for a moment, the look he gave Midoriya carrying extra meaning. Except the part where I identified him as all for one. That information is complicated, classified, and definitely not something that belongs in a standard police report. The Kiyoshi Ward shopping mall transformed into an official crime scene with practiced efficiency. The police force arrived in force, led by Detective Naomasa Tsukachi, a man in his late 30s with sharp eyes and the kind of tired expression that came from dealing with too many villain incidents. He took one look at the damaged floor, scorched marks across the plaza, and captured villain and was visibly traumatized by the student before immediately beginning to coordinate a systematic response. Naomasa ordered his team, shut the mall down temporarily and extend the search radius to 3 blocks in every direction. Coordinate with local heroes for a full sweep. We're looking for Tamura Shigaraki, any possible accomplices, and any signs of additional villain activity. They wouldn't find anything, DABI knew. All for One didn't leave traces you could follow with conventional investigation. But protocol demanded the effort, and it had to be followed. The news crews multiplied exponentially. 3 different stations now, all trying to get the best angle, all shouting questions over each other. DABI, can you confirm this was a League of Villains attack? Was the student specifically targeted? What can you tell us about the purple teleportation quirk? Is this connected to the USJ incident from earlier this semester? Naomasa cut through the media scrum like a destroyer through rough seas. All media personnel, move back behind the established perimeter immediately, he ordered sharply. This is an active crime scene, and you are interfering with an official investigation. His tone brooked no argument, and the reporters retreated, though their cameras kept rolling. Naomasa spotted DABI with Midoriya and his expression shifted. A recognition mixed with relief mixed with the exhausted gratitude of someone who had just avoided a complete catastrophe. He approached Midoriya with the practiced gentleness of someone used to interviewing traumatized civilians. I am going to need you to come down to the station so we can ask a few questions about what happened, he added quickly, seeing the fear spike in Midoriya's eyes. You're not in any trouble. It is just a testimony important for the further investigation. Then he spotted DABI properly and paused mid-step, recognition and professional respect crossing his face simultaneously. DABI waved him forward. Go ahead and take him, he said. Just don't push him too hard. He only knows what he personally witnessed, and he's already had more than enough stress for one day. Then he looked directly at Naomasa, the meaning behind the glance unmistakable. I will come by later to give my own statement. There are some details that are going to need a lot more context. Understood, Naomasa replied before lowering his voice slightly. And thank you for today. DABI just nodded. Another officer was corralling the remaining Class 1A students who had been scattered throughout the mall. "Anyone from UA needs to remain here for preliminary statements," he announced. "You're all potential witnesses in an active villain incident." "But we didn't actually see anything," Kirishima protested. "Those wooden barriers blocked the whole fight. You were still present at the scene," the officer replied while checking information on his tablet. "Protocol requires statements from everyone in the vicinity." He looked up again. "Is your entire class accounted for?" Ida immediately switched into class representative mode and did a quick head count. "Midoriya is currently with Detective Naomasa Tsukachi," he reported. "Everyone else is present." "Good. We will keep this efficient," the officer said. "One at a time. Basic questions only. What you observed, where you were when the barriers went up, and whether you noticed any suspicious activity beforehand." His radio crackled with an incoming update. "Perimeter secure. No sign of suspects in the immediate area. Expanding the search radius to 3 blocks. A second reporter had arrived by then, older and far more experienced than the others. She carried herself like someone who had covered real disaster zones before and understood exactly how to shape a narrative for the public. Standing before a professional camera setup, she spoke with the measured gravity of serious journalism. "This marks the second direct attack involving UA high school students in less than 6 months, following the USJ incident earlier this semester. Questions are already being raised about whether hero schools are doing enough to protect students during off-campus activities." She paused briefly before continuing. "The attacker's apparent teleportation ability also raises serious concerns about current security measures, many of which become nearly ineffective against that kind of mobility. Debate has already begun over whether UA should impose stricter supervision on student movement or temporarily suspend unsupervised off-campus activities until the threat is contained." The camera shifted to footage of police locking down the area before zooming in on the restrained Kurogiri. However, today's incident also demonstrated the effectiveness of rapid hero intervention. Pro-hero DABI, currently working as an instructor at UA, successfully neutralized the threat and captured what appears to be a high-value villain operative before any civilian casualties occurred. She looked directly into the camera for the closing line. "The question now is whether this represents the end of the League of Villains campaign against UA or simply another escalation in an increasingly public conflict. Attention is now turning toward how the Hero Public Safety Commission will respond to yet another brazen attack carried out in broad daylight." Back at the investigation room, specialized quirk-suppressing restraints had been brought in for Kurogiri. The misty villain was still unconscious. DABI had made sure of that with a precisely controlled strike before the police arrived, but precautions were necessary. "This is the teleportation villain from USJ," one officer confirmed, checking records on his tablet. "Kurogiri. He's wanted in connection with multiple villain incidents. This is a significant capture." "More than significant," Naomasa said quietly, watching as his team loaded Kurogiri into a specialized transport vehicle. "This is the League of Villains' primary mobility asset. Without him, they lose their ability to strike anywhere without warning." He looked at DABI, who stood nearby with arms crossed, watching the proceedings with a carefully neutral expression. "You just crippled their entire operational capability," Naomasa observed. "And because of that, they're going to come for him. Sooner or later, they will try to break him out." Before the medical team departed with the captured villain, DABI stopped them. "Wait, I need you to collect something." He produced several sealed evidence bags. Teeth fragments and blood samples from Shigaraki that he had carefully preserved during the fight. This had been one of his secondary objectives from the start: secure biological evidence. "These belong to Tamura Shigaraki, the leader of the League of Villains," DABI said, handing them over. "Document chain of custody properly." These might be critical for investigation. Obviously, that wasn't his real objective. What he actually needed was the final piece of evidence to prove something only he knew. Neo Mesa took the evidence personally, understanding the implications. We will run a full analysis. DNA, trace material, cork residue, everything we can pull from it. After making sure they were alone, DABI lowered his voice slightly. There's something else you need to know, he said. It was all for one. The statement landed like a physical blow. Neo Mesa's pen stopped mid-stroke in his notebook. He had been writing observations, but now his attention focused entirely on DABI. You're certain? His voice was carefully controlled, but the underlying tension was obvious. Shigaraki and Kurogyuri appearing didn't disturb Neo Mesa that much. They had been involved in the USJ incident months ago. Known threats could be planned for. But All for One. This was the first time anyone had truly seen All for One since his battle with All Might 6 years earlier, and it was the first real confirmation that he was still alive, still active, and still manipulating events from the shadows. This wasn't just an incident, but a game changer. DABI confirmed, meeting Neo Mesa's eyes directly. He confirmed it himself. The implications were staggering. A villain who had been content operating through proxies for years had personally intervened in a shopping mall confrontation. Either he was becoming desperate, or something about this situation had forced his hand. Just then the door opened abruptly. All Might entered in his civilian form, Toshinori Yagi, skeletal and haggard, looking far older than his actual years. The worry etched into his face was profound. Young Midoriya. His voice cracked slightly with emotion. Are you hurt? Did anyone? I am completely all right, All Might. At least physically. Midoriya said this automatically from where he sat. At first, All Might didn't fully understand what Midoriya meant. But once the situation was explained, he did. Physical wounds could be healed, but the psychological impact of facing All for One was something else entirely. All Might's gaze shifted to DABI. The relief in his eyes was profound and genuine. Thank you for stepping up and protecting him again, DABI. I couldn't. You could stop right there. DABI cut him off, deflecting the gratitude with visible discomfort. Kamui Woods handled civilian evacuation, and Stain helped keep the crowd under control. I just dealt with the immediate threat. All Might replied quietly. You confronted All for One directly and walked away from it. More importantly, you may have stopped what could have become a massacre. He paused for a moment before continuing. That's not something you brush aside as just anything, DABI. Outside the interrogation room, Neo Mesa was coordinating with other investigators. Midoriya Inko arrived like a force of nature compressed into a small, anxious package. She burst through the police station doors, eyes wild with maternal panic, spotted her son sitting mostly unharmed, and immediately dissolved into tears. Izuku. Oh God. Izuku, are you? Mom, I am safe. Midoriya said quickly, standing to intercept her before the tears became a complete breakdown. The heroes got there in time, so nothing happened to me, not even a scratch. He was lying, of course. Something had very definitely happened, but mothers needed reassurance, and sometimes reassurance required simplification. DABI stepped back immediately, giving them space. This wasn't his moment to step into. It was a mother reassuring herself that her child was still alive and unharmed. The most primal kind of relief a person could feel, sacred enough that outsiders had no place intruding on it. Inko clutched her son, sobbing into his shoulder with the kind of relief that came from confronting worst-case scenarios. After several minutes of reassurance and continued tears, the Midoriyas prepared to leave. Inko paused at the door and turned back to DABI. Thank you, she said simply, voice thick with emotion, for keeping him safe. DABI nodded but didn't trust himself to speak. What could he say? I did my job. Your son was bait in a trap I set? I used him to draw out villains? None of that would help. So he just accepted the gratitude silently and watched them leave. After the Midoriyas departed, Naomasa, All Might, and DABI gathered in a secure conference room to discuss broader implications. Today, Tamura Shigaraki directly targeted students. Naomasa began, laying out his threat assessment on the table. This represents significant escalation from the USJ incident. We have to assume he will try again, either targeting Midoriya specifically or going after other UA students. Agreed, All Might said heavily. The question is how we protect them without restricting their development as heroes. Naomasa suggested, turning to All Might. There's another consideration. Your connection to UA puts a target on the school. If you were to create some distance between yourself and the students for a while, it might lower the risk profile for. He's not going anywhere, DABI interrupted flatly. All Might looked surprised. DABI, if my presence is putting students at risk, and what exactly changes if you leave? DABI shot back sharply. All that does is send a message that threats work, that we're willing to retreat and abandon ground the moment someone applies pressure. He leaned forward, intensity radiating from every word. Naomasa watched this exchange with analytical interest. There was something in DABI's tone, a certainty that went beyond general tactical knowledge. But now wasn't the time to press that particular issue. Then we reinforce security without pulling All Might out of UA, Naomasa Tsukachi decided. We will increase undercover hero patrols around the school, tighten monitoring during off-campus activities, and coordinate with local police so response times are faster if something happens. And we push the students harder. DABI added immediately. They need to be capable of protecting themselves when heroes can't reach them right away. Today proved that. All Might nodded slowly, the decision settling into place. Agreed. The provisional license exams are coming soon anyway. We will intensify their preparation from this point forward. In a hidden location far from police surveillance, All for One reclined on a medical bed while his personal doctor tended to injuries that shouldn't have existed. The burn on his hand where DABI's flame-wrapped fist had connected through the portal was minor, superficial, and barely noteworthy in the grand scheme, but real and deeply concerning. Master! Shigaraki paced like a caged animal, scratching at his neck compulsively with bloody hands. You should have killed them there, torn them apart, made them suffer for. Tamura, the patience in All for One's voice was wearing dangerously thin. What would you have gained from killing them in a public mall surrounded by cameras and witnesses? Revenge. Satisfaction. Shigaraki's scratching intensified, drawing fresh blood. For daring to stand in my path and thinking they can oppose us. All for One studied his student with clinical detachment. This obsession with DABI had grown beyond useful motivation into something approaching liability. The boy is now really fixated on the UA teacher in ways that were becoming counterproductive. Originally, Shigaraki's development had been proceeding according to plan. His primary motive, the complete destruction of hero society, aligned perfectly with All for One's goals. His hatred for All Might provided excellent motivation. His trauma and rejection created perfect psychological conditions for manipulation and growth. But DABI's influence had disrupted that trajectory. Instead of focusing on broader societal destruction, Shigaraki was becoming personally fixated on one specific opponent. This wasn't part of the plan. Doctor, All for One said quietly, ignoring Shigaraki's continued ranting. Take Tamura and begin treatment for his injuries. The doctor moved to comply, guiding the still protesting Shigaraki toward another room. All for One remained on the medical bed, studying his burned hand with clinical interest. There was still one thing he hadn't addressed, something he had deliberately avoided acknowledging because doing so meant facing the reality of a major strategic setback. Kurogiri's capture. The loss of their teleportation specialist was devastating on multiple levels. Obviously, the tactical mobility was critical. The ability to strike anywhere, retreat instantly, and coordinate multi-location attacks. But beyond that, Kurogiri served another crucial function: stabilizing Shigaraki. The modified Nomu had been specifically designed not just for warping but for psychological management. His presence kept Shigaraki's more destructive impulses in check, providing a calming influence during stress. Without Kurogiri, All for One could already see the deterioration beginning. Shigaraki's emotional control was deteriorating, his obsessive tendencies growing stronger, while rage increasingly overwhelmed his ability to think strategically. This is becoming problematic. Soon, All for One was reconnected to his life support systems, the breathing apparatus, medical monitors, and all the machinery required to keep his damaged body functioning. He looked at his hand again. Blood stained the skin, and for once, it was his own blood rather than an enemy's. The doctor worked in silence, but even he seemed disturbed by recent events. "You attempted to steal DABI's quirk during the encounter?" "I did," All for One confirmed. That had been the real reason DABI's punch had landed. All for One hadn't tried to defend himself properly. Instead, he focused entirely on stealing the fire quirk through contact, confident his usual techniques would work. They hadn't, and the attempt failed. All for One continued, slowly flexing his burned hand. Not because of strength or resistance. The quirk itself rejected the theft, as though it didn't recognize my ability as something legitimate, as though it existed outside the normal framework entirely. He studied the damage with genuine scientific interest. "I haven't encountered a quirk that could do that in decades. Perhaps not ever." The doctor said nothing, but his expression suggested deep concern. But watching through the doorway as his student scratched compulsively at his neck, barely containing his rage, All for One wondered if patience was still possible. For just a moment, All for One allowed himself to consider an alternate timeline. What if he had managed to recruit DABI? What if that incredible combat instinct, tactical awareness, apparent immunity to quirk theft, and raw strength, what if all of that had been turned toward villainy instead of heroism? What if he had become the successor instead of Tamura? But no, the man had already chosen his path, aligning himself so completely with All Might's ideals that turning him was impossible. He had built too many bonds, family, students, and colleagues, for simple manipulation to sever. Some pieces couldn't be moved, no matter how valuable they might be. "Doctor," All for One said quietly, decision made. "Accelerate Tamura's development timeline. Recent events suggest we may need to move certain plans forward sooner than intended." The doctor hesitated. "Are you certain? An accelerated process carries significant risks." "I am aware of the risks." All for One interrupted smoothly, leaving no room for argument. "Do it anyway. We need results faster than the original schedule allows." The game was changing. Variables were multiplying beyond initial calculations, and somewhere in the chaos, a teacher who shouldn't be as competent as he was had punched through a portal and drawn blood from someone who hadn't bled in decades. All for One smiled despite the pain. After so many years of careful planning and patient manipulation, things were finally getting interesting again. Unpredictable, dangerous, exciting. Yes, this would require adjustments to the plan. But perhaps that was acceptable. Perhaps even preferable. After all, what was the point of a centuries-long game if it became too predictable? After Midoriya left with his mother, the basic police procedures were handled efficiently by Detective Naomasa and his team. And at the center of that was the unconscious, misty form of the League of Villains' most valuable asset, Kurogiri. The captured villain had been classified as an extreme flight risk. His entire quirk was built around teleportation and spatial manipulation. Standard holding facilities were completely inadequate. So the decision had been made immediately: transfer to Tartarus. That was the only facility in all of Japan equipped to handle a villain of this magnitude. It was a fortress, a black site designed specifically to swallow the worst monster society had to offer and ensure they never saw the sun again. And DABI had volunteered to accompany the transport convoy personally. Now he sat at the rear of a heavily armored, quirk-suppressing tactical vehicle as they rolled down the highway, flanked by two identical transport trucks. One running point, the other was covering their six, forming an impenetrable rolling blockade. But DABI's focus was entirely on the center of the cabin. Kurogiri was suspended inside a specialized glass containment shell. The material was completely transparent but reinforced with layers of impact-resistant polymers, designed to completely isolate the villain from the external environment. Inside the glass, heavy restraints were locked onto the only tangible part of his misty physiology, the metal neck brace. It was a brilliantly logical countermeasure. To prevent use of his warp gate quirk, the authorities had applied specialized equipment that DABI didn't fully understand technically, but the core function was clear. By restraining Kurogiri's actual body, particularly the metal neck brace visible beneath his mist form, they could neutralize his spatial manipulation abilities. The quirk required physical movement to activate. In simple words, no movement meant no warping. While the convoy traveled toward the coast, DABI's mind processed the day's events in the background. The operation had been a monumental success. He had successfully captured Kurogiri, crippling the League's mobility. He had secured Shigaraki's biological evidence directly from the source. And more importantly, now he officially confirmed All for One's active involvement. There were unexpected variables. All for One's personal appearance was unexpected, but overall, the operation had gone beyond his initial expectations. But as DABI stared at the unconscious villain, a heavy, sinking feeling settled in his gut. He knew Detective Naomasa and All Might weren't fools. Even in the chaotic aftermath at the police station, even if they hadn't voiced it directly yet, DABI had clearly been aware of the attack beforehand, because nothing else made sense. Both of them were aware that DABI reached out to Kamui Woods and also stationed his agency, Reformed Ravagers, on high alert behind the scenes. However, most of them were sure DABI was just being paranoid. But alas, they are wrong. However, the question was how. They hadn't pressed him on it yet. The sheer scale of the incident and the capture of a high-value target had demanded all their immediate attention. But DABI knew the interrogation was inevitable. Eventually, he will be asked, which they sure did. Fortunately, DABI had prepared an explanation. He claimed he had received a tip from underworld contacts, mentioned following suspicious patterns, and suggested it was a tactical prediction based on League behavior analysis. All lies, obviously, but Naomasa and All Might had chosen to accept the explanation for now. Partly because they trusted DABI's results, partly because they recognized that some intelligence sources couldn't be revealed publicly. But that wasn't what was making DABI's chest feel tight. It was the impending fallout. Because of his actions today, two of the darkest, most devastating secrets in the hero world were about to be dragged out of the shadows. The first was the DNA evidence he had practically handed to the police. If things proceed smoothly, within a few days, the lab results will come back, cross-referencing Shigaraki's genetic markers against public and restricted databases. The blood analysis would draw an undeniable line straight back to Nana Shimura. Meaning, All Might was going to find out that Tamura Shigaraki was his beloved mentor's grandson. He was going to realize that the family Nana had sacrificed everything to protect had been systematically hunted down, and the sole survivor had been warped into the ultimate weapon to destroy her legacy. It was going to break the symbol of peace in a way no battle ever could. And then there was the second secret. It is right in front of him, the one sitting inside the glass shell right in front of him. When Kurogiri arrived at Tartarus, they would run standard processing. Fingerprints, DNA swabs, and deep tissue scans. And even though not as early as in the case of Shigaraki's link, those reports would eventually reveal the horrific truth of what the creature actually was. They would find the face of Shirakumo Oboro, and the most affected individuals will be his friends and colleagues, Shota Aizawa and Hisashi Yamada, present Mike. Both of them are going to learn that their dead best friend had been dug up, desecrated, and turned into a mindless chauffeur for the villains who repeatedly tried to murder their students. DABI closed his eyes. A year ago, he might have looked at this scenario with cold, detached pragmatism. But now, he actually considered Aizawa, Yamada, and All Might as friends. They weren't just colleagues or characters of a plot. They were men he respected, men whose well-being genuinely mattered to him. And he was probably about to deliver life-altering grief. But this is for the better, DABI muttered to himself, quiet enough that the surrounding officers couldn't hear. The sooner this is dealt with, the better. Truth now is better than truth later when it's weaponized against them. It was a brutal logic, but it was the only logic that kept him sane. It was infinitely better for All Might and Aizawa to learn these horrifying truths through their own investigations and allies, rather than having All for One spring it on them in the middle of a life-or-death battle as a psychological weapon. The heavy steel doors of Tartarus sealed shut behind them with a booming, mechanical thud. DABI followed the armored transport team into the primary descent elevator. The lowest accessible level, B10, housed the absolute worst of the worst. In the original timeline, this was where All for One would eventually be imprisoned. Down there, inmates were strapped into high-tech chairs wrapped in full-body straitjackets, with automated sensor arrays tracking their brainwaves and vital signs. If a prisoner so much as thought about activating a quirk, automated machine guns linked to the vitals would open fire. It was a brutal, dehumanizing environment. And standing in the descent elevator, feeling the pressure of the ocean bearing down on the concrete walls around them, DABI couldn't deny that it was absolutely necessary for monsters capable of leveling cities. The elevator doors chimed and parted at an upper level, initiating a transfer protocol that required them to walk through several high-security cell blocks. The moment DABI stepped into the corridor, the atmosphere ignited. As he walked down the center of the aisle, hands casually tucked into his pockets, the cell block erupted into a cacophony of sheer, unadulterated hatred. DABI, you bastard! I'll kill you when I get out. Remember me. Remember what you did to my crew. The voices crashed against the reinforced glass of the cells, visceral and dripping with venom. Dozens of criminals slammed their fists against the barriers, their eyes wild with promises of revenge that would never come. The armed guards flanking the convoy shifted uncomfortably, their hands tightening on their rifles as the verbal assault continued. But DABI didn't even break his stride. His expression remained utterly, mockingly unbothered. What the guards didn't realize was that almost half the people screaming in this particular block were here specifically because DABI had hunted them down. As they moved deeper into the facility, descending level by level, the number of villains and patrol squads began to lower. As they reached level B5, DABI had been carefully scanning each floor as they passed through. This was his first time inside Tartarus. The Hero Public Safety Commission would never allow casual visits to the nation's most secure prison, so he hadn't even tried requesting access. Right then, his eyes swept the dimly lit corridor of B5. They caught on a specific cell he had been looking for. From the outside, it looked identical to the rest. However, inside it was a woman sitting, her eyes looking completely dead. But DABI's enhanced perception saw straight through her. Beneath the emptiness, there was a simmering volcanic rage. The bitter, jagged fury of ultimate betrayal.
Kaina Tsutsumi,
better known as Lady Nagant. DABI knew exactly who she was, and more importantly, he knew the blood-soaked truth that the official records had buried. She had been the Hero Public Safety Commission's greatest secret weapon. a covert assassin forced into the shadows to execute corrupt heroes and problematic villains, ensuring that the pristine image of hero society remained spotless for the ignorant masses. She had done the dirty work so the system could pretend the dirt didn't exist. And when the psychological torture had finally broken her, when she refused to be their attack dog for one more day, the chairman had threatened her life. So she put a bullet through him. What a logical choice. DABI chuckled internally. Honestly, he respected her, and not to mention, any enemy of HPSC would automatically be his friend. Anyway, the commission had framed it as the tragic murder of a fellow hero to avoid the scandal of admitting they employed a teenage hit squad. Now, the woman with the rifle quirk, capable of turning her arm into a hyperlethal sniper, rotted in this prison. As DABI walked past the reinforced glass, Lady Nagant slowly lifted her head. Their eyes met. However, it was just a fleeting glance. Nevertheless, he knew how valuable she could be. A former commission assassin with intimate knowledge of the HPSC's darkest secrets could be an incredibly valuable ally if the board ever needed to be flipped. Finally, the convoy arrived at Kurogiri's designated containment sector. The guards transfer the misty villain into a customized, high-tech restraint chair bolted to the floor of the cell. A full-body straitjacket was layered over his torso, reducing his physical mobility to absolute zero. All of this combined with Tartarus's advanced surveillance systems and sensors monitoring brainwaves, vital signs, muscle tension, and anything that might indicate attempted quirk use or escape planning. The security was absolute. DABI stood by the heavy steel door. "Transfer complete," the lead officer reported, checking a glowing data pad. "Prisoner secured. All systems are nominal." "Good," DABI said simply. He lingered for just a moment, his gaze locked on the defeated monster strapped to the chair. The creature that had once been a smiling, loud-mouthed hero student named Oboro, now reduced to a weaponized ghost buried beneath the ocean. "Enjoy your stay," DABI said quietly, knowing the acoustic sensors in the cell would carry the words to Kurogiri's ears. Then he turned and walked away, memorizing every detail of the route back to the surface. His job here was done, for now. The morning after the Kiyoshi Ward Mall incident, Class 1A filed into their homeroom wrapped in an unusual heavy quiet. They were all within the perimeter of the scene when armed police locked down the entire commercial district. The news networks had also run the same headlines throughout yesterday, repeating the same details of the villain's involvement. Aizawa and DABI are present in their usual spots. Before anyone starts throwing their hands in the air, Aizawa began, his voice flat enough to instantly kill the rising murmurs. "As you all can see for yourself, Midoriya is fine and well, and the villain who initiated the encounter escaped, though their primary transport asset was captured. That is all you need to know, and it is all you will discuss." "But Sensei," Uraraka started, her hands gripping the edge of her desk. "That is all you need to know," Aizawa repeated, layering a fraction of his quirk into his glare to demand silence. "What you do need to concern yourselves with is the upcoming summer training camp. Due to yesterday's events, the destination has been changed." A collective ripple of surprise went through the room. "The new location will only be announced on the morning of our departure," Aizawa continued. "This is a mandatory security measure, and the exact coordinates are currently known only to select faculty and the training supervisors on site. It is not up for debate." "Isn't that excessive?" Yairozu asked. "Surely, even the League of Villains would target us again soon after their last failure. We can't be certain of anything." "It is a proactive countermeasure to ensure you aren't," Aizawa said, delivering the half-truth smoothly. "The fewer people who know your location, the safer you will be." From his spot against the wall, DABI's turquoise eyes drifted lazily across the classroom, sliding past Midoriya, skipping over Bakugo, and landing briefly on Yuga Aoyama. The French student sat near the back, his usual flamboyant, sparkling posture noticeably subdued. For a fraction of a second, Aoyama's gaze darted up and met Dabi's. The boy flinched, looking away instantly, a cold sweat breaking out on the back of his neck. The spy kid, Dabi thought, all for one's unwilling little bird. The reason the League will know exactly where we're going, no matter how many confidential stamps Nizu puts on the paperwork. The question was whether to act on that knowledge. He could corner Aoyama, drag the truth out of him, and offer the terrified kid a way out of the blackmail keeping him compliant. It would be easy, but if he did that, his connection with League would also be cut. Right? The reason Dabi was damn sure of the attack was because he tracked Aoyama's movements. So if he were caught, the League would realize their feed had been cut and go to ground, waiting for a time and place of their own, choosing to strike again. No, Dabi decided. Let the kid deliver his report while Shigaraki convinced himself he still held the advantage and walked willingly into the center of the forest. When you know exactly where a trap is going to snap, it ceases to be a trap. It becomes an execution block. The first semester is officially over, Aizawa announced, gathering his papers, which means summer break starts today. Rest while you can, because once we leave for training camp, you're all going to wish you were back in this classroom instead. 3 weeks passed. It took exactly 21 days for the bureaucratic team, the forensic laboratories, and the deep cover investigations to process the blood gathered from the mall incident and the genetic material swabbed from the captured Kurogiri. Now, on the eve of Class 1A's departure for the summer training camp, the waiting was finally over. Inside Principal Nizu's heavily secured office, the atmosphere was thick enough to choke on. Nizu sat behind his desk, his usual cheerful demeanor absent. All Might sat rigidly in his skeletal civilian form, looking impossibly fragile, while Dabi leaned against the bookshelves. In the center of the room stood Detective Naomasa Tsukachi, holding 2 thick, manila folders. The lab finalized the results 3 hours ago. Naomasa began, his voice weary. He set the first folder on Nizu's desk. The blood sample recovered from Tamura Shigaraki at the mall produced conclusive genetic markers. Opening the file, he slid a genealogical chart across the polished wood surface. Shigaraki is the biological grandson of Shimura Nana, through her son, Shimura Kotaro. The silence that hit the room was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the air from All Might's lungs. The former symbol of peace went completely bloodless. His skeletal hands gripped the armrests of his chair so hard the knuckles turned stark white and the wood cracked under the pressure. Obviously, first came the denial. No! The words slipped out of Tashinori's mouth, hollow and broken. That's not Naomasa, there must be a mistake. Master Nana's son. I am afraid there isn't any mistake, Tashinori, Naomasa replied gently, looking at his old friend with quiet sympathy. We ran the sequence 3 separate times using different control methods. The result never changed. The match was definitive. Master Nana's grandson. All Might's voice fractured. She gave up her family to keep them away from him, and now her grandson. After everything she sacrificed, he still got his hands on. He couldn't finish the sentence. Nizu stepped in, his voice quiet but steady. We connected the dots from the foster care records, Tashinori. Knowing how Kotaro grew up resenting Nana's abandonment, it is entirely logical that his deeply ingrained hatred of heroes created a volatile environment. He built a life completely rejecting her world and enforced it strictly on his children. Nizu tapped a key, and an old, slightly faded family photograph appeared on the wall monitor. It showed a stern-faced Kotaro, his wife, a young daughter, and a small boy with distinctive muted blue hair. Even from the old photograph, the facial structure was unmistakable. It was the face of the monster who had tried to murder Class 1A at the USJ. The youngest, Tenko Shimura, Nizu said softly. The timing of his manifestation, the complete lack of any hero intervention during their domestic tragedy. Everything aligns too perfectly to be an accident. 6 years ago, when the household was destroyed, Neo Mesa took over, his expression grim. Official records listed it as an unexplainable tragedy with Tenko as the sole survivor. But looking at it now, with the timeline Nizu mapped out, the individual who found him wandering the streets wasn't a good Samaritan. All for one, All Might whispered, his sunken eyes wide with horror. He must have found the traumatized, broken boy and groomed him with his hatred and twisted him into Tamura Shigaraki. DABI added quietly. His goal was probably to turn your master's legacy into her worst nightmare just to torture you. The complete psychological warfare of it was almost beautiful in its cruelty. All for one hadn't just killed Nana Shimura. He had taken the very family she died to protect, orchestrated their ruin, and forged the sole survivor into a weapon designed specifically to break her successor's heart. Truly, All for one at his finest. All Might stood abruptly. Excuse me. He stumbled blindly toward the door, his long skeletal legs giving out. He caught himself heavily against the doorframe, his breathing ragged and shallow. Tashinori, Nizu said gently. I can't. All Might gasped, a hand clutching his chest as if his old wound had been ripped open all over again. Are you telling me everything she gave up was for nothing? That in the end, he still won? He turned her own blood into a weapon against us. His legs gave out as he slid down the doorframe, hitting his knees. DABI crossed the room in 3 long strides, grabbing All Might by the shoulder and hauling him back up before he could completely collapse. Breathe, old man. Get up. Ow. All Might looked at DABI, his sunken eyes swimming with desperate, haunted tears. How do I look that boy in the eye? How do I fight him, knowing he's the grandson she sacrificed everything to protect? The same way you always do, DABI said, his grip tightening on All Might's shoulder, anchoring him. By stopping him from destroying the world she built. You don't honor her legacy by letting her grandson burn it to the ground. You save him by stopping him. All Might squeezed his eyes shut, a shuddering breath rattling through his hollow chest. He nodded once, slowly, allowing DABI's anchoring grip to guide him back to his chair. As the former number 1 hero tried to compose himself, burying his face in his trembling hands, Neo Mesa turned back to the desk. The atmosphere in the room had shifted from clinical to suffocating. Neo Mesa reached for the next file. There's something else, Neo Mesa said, his voice barely above a whisper. Before he could continue, a sharp, clean knock echoed through the room. The door opened, and Shota Aizawa stepped inside. The underground hero looked exhausted, his dark eyes scanning the heavy tension in the room before he quietly took a seat. Neo Mesa waited for the door to click shut. Then, adjusting his posture, he looked directly at Aizawa. It's about Kurogiri. Kurogiri, Aizawa finally repeated, his tone flat, devoid of any context. What about him? If this is an interrogation update, you don't need me here. I have a class to grade. Neo Mesa didn't look away, but the pity in his eyes was instantly louder than any words he could have spoken. Beside him, Nizu closed his eyes. Step into it, Tsukachi, Aizawa said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous warning. What aren't you telling me? During his intake processing at Tartarus, they ran the standard genetic and quirk factor swabs. Neo Mesa explained, his voice tight. Normally, matching a John Doe's DNA against the National Registry takes months of bureaucratic red tape. It's like finding a needle in an ocean. Neo Mesa glanced briefly at DABI before looking back at Aizawa. But my office received an anonymous, encrypted tip a few days after the arrest, Neo Mesa continued. The informant suggested we bypass the civilian registry entirely. They told us to cross-reference Kurogiri's genetic markers specifically with UA. Hero course casualties from the last 15 years. It narrowed our search pool from tens of millions down to a few hundred files. DABI stared blankly out the window, offering no reaction. He had leaked that tip through the dark web channel Spinner used, knowing that waiting months for Tartarus to process the DNA normally would delay the truth far too long. He wanted the board set now. "We got a hit," Neo Mesa said softly. He pulled a photograph from the folder. It was old and a bit grainy, a standard UA student ID photo. He slid it across the desk so Aizawa could see it. Aizawa stopped breathing. The silence in the room became brittle, fragile, ready to shatter. Aizawa stared at the photograph, his dark eyes wide and locked, his face draining of all color. The image showed a young man, roughly 17 years old. He had a bright, blindingly genuine smile, a band-aid over his nose, and distinctive, cloud-like white hair styled upward. "Shirakumo Oboro," Neo Mesa said, his voice heavy with sympathy. "Registered as missing, presumed dead, 13 years ago in a building collapse during your second-year work study. And his body was never recovered. What are you? What kind of sick joke is this?" Aizawa's voice was barely a whisper, cracking under a weight he hadn't carried in over a decade. "What are you trying to suggest?" "The genetic analysis confirms it with absolute certainty," Neo Mesa replied, refusing to let his tone waver, forcing the cruel reality into the room. "Kurogiri's base physiology belongs to Shirakumo Oboro. His quirk is a modified, weaponized amalgamation of Shirakumo's cloud quirk, engineered with multiple spatial manipulation factors." Neo Mesa looked away, unable to watch the underground hero break. "The League didn't just build a warp gate, Aizawa. All for one dug up your dead friend and turned his corpse into a loyal puppet to serve as Tamura Shigaraki's caretaker." The room seemed to lose all sound. Aizawa didn't scream or drop to his knees like All Might had. Instead, a terrifying, absolute stillness took over his entire body. His fingers dug so hard into the edge of Nizu's mahogany desk that his knuckles turned a ghostly white, the wood groaning slightly under the sudden, immense pressure. "A corpse," Aizawa whispered. The words sounded hollow, scraped out from the bottom of his throat. 13 years of buried grief, of sleepless nights, of forcing himself to move past the tragedy that had defined his entire adult life. All of it came rushing back, twisted into a grotesque, sickening caricature. He closed his eyes, but behind his eyelids, he didn't see the dark room. He saw the USJ, a purple, misty villain standing between him and his students, politely introducing himself. He remembered the way Kurogiri had protected Shigaraki, the way he had spoken with that eerie, calm cadence. "Oboro, where is he?" Aizawa demanded, looking at Neo Mesa. "I want to see him, now." "In the lowest sector of Tartarus," Neo Mesa replied instantly. "Under maximum restraint and constant surveillance. We haven't begun a formal interrogation regarding this specific data yet and wanted you here first." "Prepare the transport," Aizawa said as he turned toward the door, his expression cold and unwavering. "I am going to Tartarus. I will make the arrangements immediately." Neo Mesa Tsukachi replied quietly, knowing there was no point arguing with a grieving man. Then he hesitated before speaking again. "I know this is difficult to ask right now, but I hope you will also be the one to inform someone else who has the right to know about these findings." He didn't say the name aloud, but the implication was obvious. President Mike deserved to hear the truth too. 6 hours later, in the deepest, darkest bowels of Tartarus prison, Aizawa stood in front of a reinforced soundproof glass cell. Beside him stood President Mike. Aizawa had called him the moment he left Nizu's office. The voice hero was currently weeping openly, his glasses off, his face red and raw, staring at the misty villain strapped to the high-tech restraint chair. DABI stood near the heavy steel door, leaning against the wall, arms crossed. He had accompanied them at Nizu's request, as the two men were currently watching their hearts be ripped out of their chests. "Oboro," Mick's voice cracked, his palms hitting the glass. "Hey, look at me, man. It's Hizashi. Shota's here too. We're right here." Inside the cell, Kurogiri didn't move. The dark purple mist around his collar swirled lazily. His yellow, slit-like eyes remained fixed on the blank wall ahead. The baseline scans show zero cognitive retention. The guard in the corner volunteered nervously, his hand resting on his holster. He doesn't register external stimuli unless it pertains to directives regarding Tamura Shiga. "Quiet," Aizawa snapped, his eyes flashing red. The guard flinched and fell silent. Aizawa stepped closer to the glass, lifting a hand to press his palm flat against the cold surface, directly opposite the hollow space where his friend's face used to be. "Shirakumo Oboro," Aizawa said, his tone flat, forcing the emotion down into his chest. "Class 2A Hero Course. The idiot who wanted to start an agency together because you couldn't stand the thought of anyone working alone. I still go back." Mike choked out, a ragged sob escaping him. "Every single year. I bring those stupid pork buns from the corner store. Shota and we talked to the stone, Oboro. The promise we made to become pros, it happened. But there were supposed to be 3 of us." Aizawa leaned forward, resting his forehead against the glass. The barrier between them felt miles thick. "I don't know what's left of you," Aizawa whispered, the absolute exhaustion finally bleeding into his words. "I don't know if he erased everything, but if you can hear me, if there's even a shred of you left in the dark, just know nobody gave up. Nobody left you behind." Inside the chamber, the mist suddenly shifted. It wasn't the slow, idle drift of the automated vents. It was a sharp, erratic jerk. The glowing yellow slits flickered, dragging away from the wall, trembling as they locked onto Aizawa's face. Loud! The intercom crackled, the output heavily synthesized and distorted by static, but the cadence was a ghost from a decade ago. "So damn loud," Mike gasped, his hand flying to his mouth to stifle a cry. "Oboro? Oh God, Oboro. Hurts." The mist violently shuddered, the restraint chair whining as Kurogiri's frame strained against the metal clamps. "Shota, it hurts." Then, the light in the slits vanished. The mist settled back into its smooth, uniform hum. The blank, unblinking stare returned, burying the ghost back beneath layers of corrupted quirks. "He's there." Mike wept, grabbing Aizawa's shoulder, his grip frantic. "Shota, did you hear that? He's still in there." "I heard," Aizawa said. He didn't cry, but his eyes simply hardened, turning into cold, unyielding obsidian. He turned slowly to face the guard. "I want his full intake log. Every genetic scan, every neural map, and every piece of data Tartarus has logged since he arrived. Sir, those files are highly classified medical. I have Level S underground clearance, and the man in that chair is my classmate." Aizawa stepped into the guard space, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly calm register. "Get me the files, or I will dismantle the bureaucratic red tape of this facility piece by piece. Do you understand me?" The guard swallowed hard, looking at the dark red tint flaring in Aizawa's eyes. I will request the transfer immediately." Eraserhead. Aizawa turned back to the glass. "I am going to fix this, Oboro," he said quietly to the empty mist. "I don't care what it takes. I will find a way to drag you out. And if I can't..." His hands curled into tight fists inside his pockets. "If I can't save you, I will make sure all for one pays for every single second you spend in this cell. That's a promise." By the door, DABI slowly closed his eyes, a grim, humorless tilt to his mouth. This was the true face of the man they were fighting. All for One didn't just kill his enemies. He dug them up, reshaped them, and used their corpses to break the spirits of the living. And for once, DABI had nothing sarcastic to say. He just stood there, letting them carry the weight. Next day, DABI's private facility in the UA. The contrast of what he was part of today would be enough to give a man emotional whiplash. Just hours ago, he had seen the number one hero, and his colleagues mourned in sadness. Now, he was lying on his back in the sun-drenched garden behind their newly repaired UA apartment. Tomorrow morning, they will board the buses for the summer training camp at the Beast's Forest, where the quiet, meticulous trap he had been setting for the League of Villains would finally snap shut. It was quite close to a mini-war, but for now, and for the next 24 hours, the war could wait. DABI rested his head on Rumi's lap, his eyes closed against the bright afternoon glare. Rumi's fingers carded lazily through his white hair. Her other hand held a thick paperback novel she had barely turned a page of in the last half hour. She was too busy watching the two small girls playing in the grass a few meters away. Eri and Himiko orbited the garden like twin satellites, their laughter ringing out in the warm air. It was a profound thing to witness. Himiko, or Toga, as they had quietly agreed to call her when the official paperwork eventually needed to be filed, had been so cautious during her first few weeks. The temporal rewinding of Eri's quirk had stripped away the teenage serial killer, leaving behind a 4-year-old girl with no conscious memory of the blood and madness that had defined her previous life. But today, running barefoot through the grass alongside Eri, she was just a child. Her golden eyes were bright with unburdened joy, her small hands reaching out to catch the dandelion seeds drifting on the breeze. "We did good, you know," Rumi murmured, her voice a low, rumbling purr that vibrated against DABI's neck. DABI cracked one turquoise eye open, looking up at her from her lap. "We haven't completely ruined them yet, if that's what you mean." "Shut up, dummy. Take the win." Rumi smiled, a soft, unguarded expression that she reserved strictly for this perimeter. "Look at them. They're happy." "Yeah." DABI agreed quietly, letting his eyes slide shut again. The piece held for another 10 minutes before a sharp, excited gasp shattered it. "Eritian." "Look," Himiko's voice pitched upward in delight. "A bird." DABI opened his eyes again, turning his head slightly to watch. A small, brown sparrow had fluttered down over the wall, landing on the edge of a stone bird bath. It was quick, erratic, and entirely unimpressed by the two small humans staring at it. Rumi's posture shifted instinctively, her legs tensing beneath DABI's head. "Should we stop them before they scare it into the street? Let them try to catch it," DABI murmured, not moving. "That bird's faster than the two of them put together. They will spend 5 minutes running in circles, wear themselves out, and save us the trouble of making them exercise later." A beat passed as another failed grab sent the bird darting away. Think of it as free cardio. As predicted, the chase began. The sparrow fluttered from the bird bath to a fence post, then to a low-hanging branch of a cherry blossom tree, playing a game of keep away that the girls pursued with absolute, unblinking determination. They crept forward with exaggerated, cartoonish stealth, only to giggle and break into a run the moment the bird took flight again. Eventually, the sparrow seemed to grow tired of the game. It fluttered up to a slightly higher branch, out of reach of small hands but still well within the garden. Eri and Himiko stood directly beneath it, both panting softly. "Come down," Eri called up to it seriously, like the bird might respond to polite requests. "We just want to pet you," Himiko added, equally solemn. The sparrow tilted its head and chirped once, a sound that was almost mockingly cheerful, and then, defying every known law of avian survival instincts, it fluttered down. It didn't land on the grass, but directly on top of Eri's silver hair. Eri froze completely, not breathing or moving a single muscle, her large red eyes darting frantically to the side to look at Himiko without moving her neck. Himiko, to her credit, immediately understood the assignment. She slapped both hands over her mouth to muffle a squeal of delight and nodded furiously, urging Eri to be careful. With agonizing slowness, moving in millimeters, Eri raised both hands toward her own head. Her small fingers brushed against the soft, warm feathers. The bird ruffled its wings but didn't fly away. Gently, Eri cupped her hands over the creature and brought it down to eye level. "It's so soft," she breathed, wonder filling her voice. Himiko leaned in so close their shoulders touched. "Look at its eyes," she said quietly. "They're like tiny black beads." Then Eri, displaying a level of generosity that DABI knew most adults didn't possess, carefully held her cupped hands out to her friend. "Your turn." Himiko took the bird as if she were being handed a fragile piece of glass. Her entire face lit up with a joy so pure it was almost blinding. She brought the bird closer to her chest, cradling it perfectly. "It's so fluffy," Himiko whispered, gently brushing her cheek against the bird's head. "I love its fur." Eri shook her head lightly. "Not fur," she corrected in a soft voice. "Birds have feathers. Fur is for dogs and cats." "Oh, right, feathers." Himiko smiled, continuing her gentle petting. Then Eri remembered they had an audience. "Papa! Mama!" Eri shouted, instantly forgetting the need for quiet. She spun around and sprinted toward where DABI and Rumi were resting, leaving Himiko standing alone with the bird. "Look what we caught." Eri practically collided with DABI's ribs, grabbing his arm and pulling with all her negligible body weight. Come see. We caught a real bird and it didn't fly away." DABI sighed, letting himself be dragged upright into a sitting position. "I see it, kiddo. You've got the makings of a master hunter." It landed right on my head. Eri bounced on her toes, vibrating with adrenaline. And now Himiko-chan is petting it. "Come look." Rumi was already standing, dusting grass off her shorts with a fond smile. "That's incredible, sweetie. You must have been very gentle for it to trust you." "I was." "Now hurry." Eri dragged DABI by the hand back toward the cherry tree. But as they closed the distance, DABI's spider sense flared. DABI's eyes snapped to Himiko. She was still holding the bird, but her posture had entirely shifted. The innocent, childlike wonder had drained from her frame, replaced by a rigid, trembling tension. Her golden eyes were no longer looking at the bird as a pet. They were dilated, fixated on the pulse throbbing at the creature's fragile neck. The bird felt the shift. It began to thrash, chirping in sudden, frantic panic, its wings beating desperately against Himiko's small hands. But Himiko didn't let go. Her grip tightened. And then, moving with a jerky, almost involuntary compulsion, she brought the thrashing bird up to her mouth. "Himiko, what are you?" Rumi started, her voice faltering as she stepped forward. Before the sentence could finish, Himiko bit down. There was a sickening, wet crunch. The bird let out a single, sharp shriek of agony. DABI immediately understood what was happening. Himiko's quirk had awakened, and the biological imperative of transform. The bone-deep, genetic hunger for blood seemed to have clawed its way to the surface of her 4-year-old mind. She didn't understand the craving. She only knew that she loved the bird, and her twisted genetics told her that consuming its blood was how you showed love. DABI closed the distance smoothly and placed his large hand gently over Himiko's. Himiko froze as she slowly lowered her hands. The bird was still alive, twitching and bleeding from the small puncture wounds where Himiko's newly elongated canine teeth had pierced its wing and shoulder. A drop of crimson blood ran down Himiko's chin. The taste of it hit her tongue, and the absolute, horrifying reality of what she had just done crashed into her conscious mind. Eri's laughter had stopped. Her face showed worry and confusion. The fog of instinct broke. Himiko looked at the bleeding, dying bird in her hands, then looked up at DABI, then at Rumi, and finally at Eri, who was staring in wide-eyed, silent shock. She dropped the bird. It hit the grass with a pathetic flutter. Himiko stumbled backward, her small hands flying up to cover her blood-stained mouth. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving. Even without her adult memories, the visceral trauma of her original childhood remained encoded in her soul. She knew with absolute certainty what came next. A freak. She had done something horrible, something twisted, and now the adults would look at her with disgust and revulsion. She was certain they would yell at her, punish her, and throw her out into the cold, because monsters like her didn't deserve a home. Himiko squeezed her eyes shut, curled her arms over her head, and curled into a tight, defensive ball, bracing for the inevitable strike. However, the strike never came. Instead, there was only the soft rustle of fabric as DABI knelt slowly into the grass, bringing himself completely down to her eye level. Himiko flinched, her eyes squeezed tight, her small shoulders shaking violently as she waited for the screaming to start.
I'm sorry.
Hey, DABI said. His voice wasn't raised or angry, but it carried the same quiet, steady, impossibly calm tone he used when reading them a bedtime story. Confused, terrified, Himiko peeled one golden eye open. DABI was right there, but there was no disgust on his face. He looked at the smear of blood on her chin with the exact same mild concern he would have shown if she had spilled chocolate milk on her shirt. He reached out. Himiko flinched again, but DABI simply pulled the sleeve of his expensive, comfortable sweater down over his hand and gently wiped the blood away from her mouth. It's okay, Toga, DABI said softly, using her family name deliberately, grounding her in reality. Take a breath, and nobody is going to hurt you. The dam broke. Tears began to spill from her eyes in silent, endless rivers, tracking down her pale cheeks as her chest hitched with suppressed sobs. She didn't understand. Why wasn't he yelling? Why wasn't he disgusted? Before she could process it, a small pair of arms wrapped fiercely around her from the side.
Eri.
Eri buried her face in Himiko's shoulder, hugging her with a desperate, crushing grip. It's okay, Eri whispered, her own voice thick with tears. You weren't trying to hurt it. You just wanted to love it, so it's okay, Himi-chan. DABI shifted forward, wrapping his large arms around both of the trembling girls, pulling them into a wide, protective embrace. Himiko buried her face in DABI's chest, finally letting out a ragged, shattering sob, her tiny hands gripping his sweater like a lifeline. A few feet away, Rumi had already moved into action. She had scooped up the injured bird with incredible gentleness, inspecting the damage. The wing is punctured, and it's bleeding, but the bone isn't broken, she said quietly, her professional hero assessment overriding her maternal panic. Hearing Rumi's voice, Eri pulled back from the hug. She looked at the blood, then at Himiko, who was still weeping. Eri's face hardened, and a look of absolute, unshakable determination settled over her 4-year-old features. Mama, Eri said, holding her hands out. Give it to me. Rumi hesitated for a fraction of a second, glancing at DABI, before carefully transferring the trembling bird into Eri's palms. Eri closed her eyes without panicking, refusing to think about the dark, windowless room where Overhaul had told her she was a curse or the things she had been forced to destroy. Instead, she thought about Himiko crying because she believed she was a monster and about finding a way to fix what had been broken. A soft, warm light began to emanate from the small horn on the right side of Eri's forehead. Right before their eyes, the blood staining the bird's feathers vanished as puncture wounds closed and torn muscle, knit itself back together, reversing to a state that existed before the injury. Even the ruffled feathers settled into place, smooth and pristine as though nothing had ever happened. In less than 3 seconds, the golden light faded. Eri opened her eyes, and she was breathing a little heavily, a bead of sweat on her brow, but she was smiling. The bird chirped loudly, shaking itself out, completely revitalized and perfectly healthy. Eri turned to Himiko and held the bird out. "See," Eri said, beaming. "It's all better now. You can pet it again." At that moment, DABI understood. Children are unpredictable. Next day, at 6 a.m., the UA High School parking lot was a portrait of teenage misery. The morning air was still thick with the damp, heavy humidity of early summer, but that wasn't what had Class 1A dragging their feet. It was the hour. "This is a human rights violation," Kaminari groaned, his forehead resting against the cool metal side of the idling bus. "Who schedules a departure for 6 in the morning? The sun has barely just woken up. People who understand the logistical necessity of arriving at a remote destination before nightfall," Ida responded. He was already doing deep lunges beside the luggage compartment, looking infuriatingly awake. Proper preparation and an early departure are the bedrock of any successful expedition. "I suggest you stretch, Kaminari-kun. Ida, please." Jiro rubbed her temples. "Have mercy. If you chop your arms one more time, I am going to tie them together with my jacks." DABI leaned against the open doors of the bus, a cup of black coffee in one hand, watching the chaos. A few yards away, Aizawa was addressing Class 1B and their homeroom teacher, Vlad King. The plan officially communicated to the staff and students was simple: absolute secrecy. Due to the recent string of catastrophic events, the USJ breach, the mall incident, and the targeted attack on DABI's apartment, Principal Nizu had changed the training camp location at the 11th hour. The new coordinates were only given to a handful of senior faculty and the on-site supervisors. As far as UA was concerned, this was a brilliant, foolproof countermeasure to ensure the students' safety. You couldn't attack a target if you didn't know where it was. DABI took a slow sip of his coffee, his turquoise eyes sliding over the crowd until they landed on Yuga Aoyama, whose usual sparkling demeanor was replaced by a pale, rigid nervousness. The spy kid, DABI thought, his expression remaining perfectly flat. Aoyama had probably received his orders from All for One, and the kid was going to transmit their location the moment the buses stopped and the GPS coordinates became clear. Obviously, DABI could have stopped it, and obviously he didn't. Class 1A, left bus. Class 1B, right bus. Aizawa's exhausted voice finally cut through the morning chatter. "Load your gear, find your seats, and shut up. We're stopping only once for a bathroom break. Don't complain between stops unless you are actively bleeding to death." "Sensei, where exactly are we going?" Kaminari asked, hoisting his duffel bag. "You will find out when we arrive. Can you at least give us a hint? Mountains? Beach? A hyperbaric torture chamber? Get on the bus, Kaminari." For the first 10 minutes of the highway journey, the students made a valiant attempt to respect Aizawa's demand for silence. Then, natural teenage chaos reasserted itself. Hiroshima and Siro started a loud debate about hero rankings. Shido was leaning over the seats, trying to convince Tsuyu to rate the boys' summer casual outfits, and Bakugo was threatening to blow up anyone who bumped his seat. "Bathroom break," Aizawa announced. 10 minutes. Do not wander off." The students filed out to stretch their legs. DABI stood by the doors, doing a quick, instinctive head count. Everyone was present. "Hey, DABI-sensei?" Kaminari pointed toward the empty parking lot. "Where's Class 1B's bus? Shouldn't they be stopping here too? They took a different route." DABI replied smoothly, leaning against the vehicle. "You'll meet up at the destination." Yairozu's brow furrowed. Is the faculty intentionally splitting our forces to make tracking our movements more difficult for any potential surveillance? 10 minutes means 10 minutes, Yayorozu, DABI said, completely ignoring her correct deduction. Get back on the bus before Aizawa wakes up cranky. After 4 more hours of journey, the scenery outside the windows shifted dramatically. The concrete highways gave way to dense, towering pine forests, the road winding steeply upward into the isolated mountains. Finally, the bus pulled off into a wide, dirt-paved scenic overlook. It featured a wooden safety railing and a staggering, plunging view of a massive, heavily forested valley below. All right, everyone out, Aizawa grunted. Unzipping his yellow sleeping bag, the students piled out, groaning and stretching their stiff muscles. Man, finally, Ciro sighed, leaning over the railing to look at the vast expanse of trees below. I thought we were going to be on that bus forever. Where is the lodge, anyway? You are here, a cheerful, energetic female voice rang out. The students jumped, spinning around to see a sleek black car parked near the tree line. 3 figures stepped out. 2 women wearing elaborate, brightly colored cat-themed hero costumes, and a small, fiercely scowling boy standing behind them. The wild pussycats, the woman in red announced, striking a dramatic, synchronized pose with her partner. Professional hero team, reporting for duty. I am Mandalay, the red-costumed hero continued, winking at the stunned teenagers. And this is Pixie Bob. Ragdoll and Tiger are waiting for you at the base. We'll be your supervisors for next week. Meow, Pixie Bob added, her claws flashing in the sunlight. Class 1 stared in utter bewilderment. Hiroshima scratched the back of his neck. That's awesome and all, but where exactly is the training facility? Mandalay smiled, pointing a gloved finger straight down into the sprawling, endless ocean of trees at the bottom of the valley. See that small building way down there at the base of the mountain? That's your lodge. Kaminari's face lit up. Oh, sweet. So we just hop back on the bus and drive down there. Nope. Pixie Bob's grin turned absolutely, terrifyingly feral. You're going to get there using your quirks. It is currently 9:30 a.m. You have until 12:30 p.m. to reach the facility. That's 3 hours. Those who don't make it before the deadline don't get lunch. Wait, what? Multiple students shouted in unison. Welcome to the Beast's Forest, kittens. Before anyone could make a run for the safety of the bus, Pixie Bob slammed both of her hands into the dirt. Her Earth Flow quirk activated instantly. The ground beneath Class 1 suddenly liquefied and buckled, creating a massive landslide that swept all 20 students off the edge of the overlook. What the hell? Bakugo's furious scream echoed off the mountainside as they plummeted into the canopy below. They landed in a chaotic, tumbling heap of dirt, groans, and tangled limbs at the edge of the dark forest. The trees here were impossibly thick, casting long, eerie shadows that blocked out most of the morning sun. This is insane, Jiro groaned, pushing herself off the dirt and rubbing her bruised shoulder. They literally just threw us off a cliff. Guys, look, Hagakure shouted, a floating uniform sleeve pointing into the shadows. Something's moving. The ground trembled, and the trees parted, snapping like twigs, as a massive creature emerged. It was easily 15 feet tall, shaped vaguely like a bear, but composed entirely of hardened clay, rocks, and packed earth. Koji Koda, trembling but determined, stepped forward to activate his quirk. Please, calm down. We don't want to. The beast didn't even hesitate, swinging a massive earthen claw directly at his head. Koda yelped, diving backward into the dirt just in time to avoid being flattened. It's not working. Koda panicked, scrambling away. It's not a real animal. It's made of dirt. Then we smash it. Bakugo didn't hesitate. He launched himself forward, the palms of his hands igniting. However, unlike his usual wild, wasteful blast, he compressed the ignition, using a precise, concentrated AP shot that tore a clean, devastating hole straight through the beast's chest. "I have got the legs." Green lightning crackled violently across Midoriya's body. Channeling full cowling, he darted under the creature's flailing guard. Simultaneously, thick tendrils of black energy erupted from his forearm, black whip, lashing out to wrap tightly around the beast's torso, anchoring it in place. With a ferocious pivot, Midoriya delivered a reinforced kick to its knee joint, shattering the clay structure. "Finish it!" Todoroki swept his right arm forward, sending a sudden, sweeping wave of glacial ice across the forest floor, freezing the beast's remaining limbs solid to the earth. Recipro burst. Ida's engines roared as he descended from a midair jump, his metal-plated boots crashing into the frozen dirt monster and shattering it into a million harmless pieces of mud. "Okay, that was pretty cool." Kirishima grinned, hardening his fists. "We've got this. Don't celebrate yet," Yaoyorozu warned, pulling a bow staff from her forearm as the ground began to rumble from 3 different directions at once. "There are more coming. A lot more." Kaminari looked up at the sky, tears pricking his eyes. Why does this keep happening to us? While Class 1 faced their first brutal hurdle at the training camp, a far more dangerous storm was brewing in the shadows. All for One was not a man accustomed to setbacks. The recent humiliation in the shopping complex, orchestrated entirely by DABI, was a variable he had no intention of leaving unchecked. In his grand design, the chessboard belonged solely to Tamura Shigaraki and All Might's successor, Izuku Midoriya. DABI was an anomaly, an unmapped variable outside the syllabus, and one that needed to be eliminated before he could disrupt the pieces any further. By all accounts, All for One was supposed to be in deep hiding, recovering from his wounds. Instead, he stood deep within an isolated mountain range, utilizing a crude, stolen teleportation quirk. It lacked the refined elegance of his usual methods, manifesting instead as a foul, bubbling puddle of black, melted tar that slowly reconstituted his form in the woods. He was here for his most loyal asset, Gigantomachia. For years, the Colossus had remained isolated in these mountains, a living weapon concealed even from the keen eyes of All Might and Gran Torino during All for One's reign of terror. Utilizing a subterranean mole quirk, the beast had stayed buried beneath the earth, waiting for the day Kurogiri would finally come to locate him and awaken him for the League's grand rise. But DABI's interference had accelerated the timeline. All for One was being forced to play his hidden card early. Standing before the quiet, rumbling mountain, All for One stared up at the earth. It was time to transport his masterpiece to the board at the exact place and the exact time of his choosing. It was 5:20 p.m. as the Class 1A finally stumbled into the clearing where the lodge stood. They were filthy, covered head to toe in mud, sweat, and sap. Their casual summer clothes were torn. They were bleeding from dozens of minor scrapes, and they looked like they had just survived a small war. Pixie Bob stood on the porch of the lodge, checking her watch with a wide smile. 5:20. Honestly, I thought it would take you kittens a lot longer. The earth beasts usually slow first years down until midnight. Longer. Ashido collapsed face first onto the grass, not even trying to catch herself. We've been fighting for 8 hours. My legs feel like jelly, but you figured out their structural weaknesses quickly, and your teamwork was phenomenal. Pixie Bob beamed, giving them a thumbs up. Very impressive. You guys hit way harder than a normal freshman class. From behind Mandalay, the small, scowling boy stepped out. He wore a red hat with small horns and an expression that suggested he found the sight of 20 exhausted teenagers deeply offensive. This is my nephew, Koda, Mandalay said gently, placing a hand on his small shoulder. Kota, say hello to the UA students. Midoriya, incapable of turning off his earnest, heroic nature even when he was dead on his feet, immediately perked up. He wiped some dirt off his cheek and stepped forward with a warm, friendly smile. Hi there. I am Izuku Midoriya. It's really nice to meet. Kota didn't say a word. He simply stepped forward, wound up his small fist, and drove it directly into Midoriya's groin with shocking, merciless accuracy. Gosh, dude. The blow never landed. Instead, a sharp probing pain stabbed through Midoriya's head. Ever since the ambush at the shopping complex, his danger senses had been on high alert. Combined with the adrenaline of fighting his way through the forest, his combat instincts flared on pure, volatile reflex. His hand snapped down, catching the boy's fist inches from impact. For a fraction of a second, Midoriya's expression darkened. A lethal, dead-eyed, serious glare locked onto Kota, evaluating him purely as a hostile threat. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop. Kota flinched violently, the breath catching in his throat. Even Mandalay and Pixie Bob snapped their heads toward Midoriya, a sudden chill running down their spines at the raw intensity radiating from a mere student. Midoriya! Several classmates shouted in horror, assuming the blow had connected. But just as quickly as it appeared, the terrifying aura vanished, replaced by Midoriya's usual gentle smile. He let go of the boy's fist and rubbed the small of his back, laughing nervously. Are you okay? Uraraka asked, hovering over him. I am fine. I managed to block it. Midoriya breathed, swallowing hard. A cold sweat broke out on his neck as a phantom ache flared in his mind. A sharp reminder of the brutal surprise attacks DABI had subjected him to during their training phase. That could have been painful if you hadn't blocked it, Deku. Ida rushed forward, chopping his arms righteously. You brute. That was completely uncalled for. You cannot simply assault guests who are offering a friendly greeting. It violates all societal norms of. Taken aback by his failure and still unnerved by Midoriya's glance, Kota scrambled back, his defensive scowl returning to mask his fear. I don't want to hang around people like you, he spat, his voice trembling slightly. Thinking you can just become heroes because you want it. You're all just wannabes playing dress-up. It's pathetic. He spun around and began stomping away toward the lodge, clearly intending to completely ignore their existence for the rest of the week. Hoping to diffuse the tension and change the subject, Midoriya looked around. MHA, wait, did anyone see DABI-sensei? He didn't ride the bus down with Aizawa-sensei. Where is he? Kota froze mid-step. His small boots skidded in the dirt. He spun back around so fast his horned hat nearly flew off his head. The angry, cynical scowl had vanished entirely, replaced by wide-eyed, breathless shock. Did you just say DABI? Kota asked, his voice pitching up. The blue sun. Yes? Midoriya blinked, thoroughly confused by the sudden 180-degree personality shift. He's our assistant homeroom teacher. Why? Kota didn't just walk back. He sprinted across the clearing, skidding to a halt right in front of Midoriya. The hostility had completely evaporated, and he was practically vibrating with excitement. Are you serious? You're really his students. Kota's eyes were shining like stars, his hands clenching into tiny, enthusiastic fists. Is he really here? Can I see him? Do you think he remembers me? I need to thank him. The entire class stared in stunned bewilderment. Even Bakugo clicked his tongue, momentarily speechless at the display. What? Thank him, Kirishima whispered, squinting. Did DABI-sensei make you use your brainwashing on this kid when we weren't looking? I didn't do anything, Shinso replied, his tone entirely flat as he rubbed the back of his neck. Don't look at me. My quirk doesn't work retroactively from 3 years ago. Mandalay sighed, a fond, somewhat exasperated smile touching her lips as she watched her nephew.
Kota absolutely idolizes DABI.
He has ever since. Since he saved my mom and dad. Kota interrupted, bouncing on his toes, completely abandoning his tough guy act. 3 years ago, this giant villain with muscle powers attacked them, and they were going to die, but then DABI showed up. He used his blue flames and he looked so cool, and he saved them. I've wanted to meet him again ever since. But he's an underground hero, so he's always so busy, and yeah, we know. Mandalay chuckled, stepping forward to ruffle his hair. Midoriya stared at the kid. He did know about the water hose incident, and DABI saved them from a villain called Muscular. However, he wasn't aware that a kid was also involved in the incident. Aizawa stepped out onto the porch, looking exactly as tired as he had when he went to sleep on the bus hours ago. I see you all survived, Aizawa droned. Congratulations on taking 8 hours to cross terrain that should have taken 4. Sensei, Midoriya called out. Where is DABI-sensei? Perimeter check, Aizawa replied flatly. He's been out in the woods mapping the terrain. He will be back for dinner. His gaze shifted to the exhausted class. Now, get your luggage from the bus, put it in your assigned rooms, and meet in the dining hall. After dinner, you can bathe in the hot springs and rest. Tomorrow at dawn, the real training begins. So soon, Zero whimpered. Your days of fooling around ended the second you stepped off that bus, Aizawa said, his eyes flashing dangerously. Get used to the pain. As the students trudged miserably toward the lodge to collect their bags, Kota immediately attached himself to Midoriya's side, shadowing him like a small, eager duckling. Is it true he fought 2 Nomu monsters at once? Kota asked, firing off questions without pausing for breath. Yes, but... And he saved a girl from the Yakuza? And he fought a teleportation villain at the mall a few weeks ago. I saw it on the news. Does he really have a sword made of fire? Midoriya looked helplessly at Uraraka, who simply giggled and offered an apologetic shrug. While Kota continued his rapid-fire interrogation, Midoriya's thoughts briefly wandered back to the boys' aborted attack. When Kota had lunged, a completely unfamiliar sensation had fired within him. A sudden, sharp spark of awareness right before his body moved on instinct. He couldn't pinpoint it exactly, but based on the files All Might had given him, it had to be the quirk of the 4th user. Aikage Shinomori. Danger Sense. Shinomori had held one for all longer than anyone besides All Might, spending his entire life avoiding conflict to cultivate power. The quirk was supposed to manifest as a sharp pain in the head, alerting the user to imminent threats and malicious intent. With all the recent stress and sudden ambushes Midoriya had been facing, the dormant power was finally clawing its way to the surface. But Midoriya made a mental note right then and there. DABI could never find out that his second quirk had triggered for the first time simply because his lineage was on the line. The first time Black Whip had manifested, it had nearly torn a training ground apart. Now, his second extra quirk had sparked into life simply because his groin was in mortal peril. If DABI found out that Midoriya possessed a built-in radar for physical danger, he wouldn't be impressed. He would look at it as a personal challenge. In the name of training and creating an environment to force the quirk to develop, DABI would subject him to the most absurd, unhinged surprise attacks imaginable. Midoriya shuddered slightly, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. For the sake of his own survival, Danger Sense was going to remain a closely guarded secret. After dinner, class won a split for the hot springs, a thick wooden wall separating the boys and girls as heavy steam rose into the cool evening air. When the first group of boys slid open the door, they froze solid. Guys, Shinso muttered, stopping dead in his tracks and blinking through the thick mist. "We might have the wrong room. What are you stalling for? Shinso? Move your..." Kirishima cut himself off as he piled in behind him, his jaw dropping. Dabi-sensei? Lounging in the far corner with his arms draped over the smooth stone lip was their assistant homeroom teacher. No face mask, eyes completely closed, and a look of pure, unbothered satisfaction on his scarred face. "The water's perfect, kids," Dabi drawled, not even bothering to open an eye. "Close the door. You're letting the draft in." "Sensei," Ida stammered, instantly chopping his arm through the steam. "We were under the impression you were arriving tomorrow with the primary logistics and support team. Plans change, Tenya. Deal with it," Dabi replied lazily. Near the entrance, little Koda was sitting aggressively on a small plastic stool. The girls had formally designated him as the official lookout to ensure the boys didn't try anything funny near the dividing wall. A job he had been taking with grim, deadly seriousness, until he wiped the steam from his eyes. "The blue sun," Koda whispered, his jaw dropping as he practically magnetized to the edge of the tub, his eyes shining. "He's really here." But unlike his admiration, he didn't try to approach him. He just stayed behind. Dabi sensed this gaze, but for now he ignored it. Sensing an opportunity, Kaminari leaned over Shiro, whispering out of the corner of his mouth. "Hey, look how high that wall goes. If we just create a human pyramid, I bet we could." "I can hear you, Kaminari," Dabi interrupted smoothly, resting his head back. "And if I see so much as a stray elbow leaving this water, I will personally use your lightning rod ass to boil the entire tank. Understand?" "Crystal clear, sir," Kaminari squeaked, sinking instantly up to his chin. No one could quite pinpoint the exact moment the shift happened, but somehow the casual gathering organically morphed into a deep, philosophical discussion about their love lives. Before long, the students had gathered around Dabi in a tight semicircle, listening with a level of rapt attention they hadn't once shown during a single textbook lecture. "Look, the basics aren't that hard," Dabi was saying, splashing a bit of water onto his shoulders while the boys listened like disciples. "You read the room, you don't act like a desperate creep, and you pay attention. But what about the pressure, Sensei?" Kaminari asked proactively, practically raising his hand in the water. "What if you choke? Then you fail. Next question," Dabi deadpanned. He glanced over at the class rep, who was currently sitting rigidly at a distance, looking deeply uncomfortable. "What's the matter, Tenya? You're awfully quiet over there. Are you defying your teacher's curriculum now? This is highly unorthodox behavior for a school-sanctioned training camp facility." Ida protested righteously, his ears turning red. A hero's mind should be focused entirely on physical cultivation and... "Sit down and take notes, Tenya." Dabi cut him off with a lazy glare. Ida shut up instantly, sinking up to his nose in the hot water with a defeated bubble. "Listen up," Dabi continued, looking over the crowd. "With the right approach, most of you are going to be fine. But there are exactly 3 idiots in this bath right now who won't land a girl in their entire lives. Except for them, you're all in decent hands, so don't worry." "Wait, really?" Shiro chuckled, leaning forward. "Who are the tragedies?" Dabi lazily lifted a hand, pointing his finger sequentially through the steam. "It's these 3, Mr. Clueless, Mr. Explosive, and Mr. Super Clueless." He was pointing directly at Shoto, Bakugo, and Midoriya. It was a hilarious irony. These were the exact 3 students Dabi had been singled out on the very first day of school as the absolute strongest in the class, a claim that had been proven right time and time again in battle. But this time around, he was putting them on blast for a completely different kind of battlefield. "Wait, really?" Ojiro chuckled. "The top 3? You want me to prove it?" Dabi smirked, leaning his head back against the stone. He flicked his eyes over to his right. Shoto, have you ever hit on a girl from your class? Shoto blinked, completely earnest as he looked back at him. Why would I hit a girl? Violence against classmates is against campus regulations. A collective, simultaneous smack echoed through the hot spring as every single boy in the water face-bombed. DABI closed his eyes and dragged a hand down his own face, letting out a heavy, exhausted sigh. See? You see that? DABI gestured wildly toward Shoto. Exhibit A. Absolute hopeless case. Then, DABI turned his predatory, mocking gaze toward the blonde sitting by the far edge. Which brings us to Bakugo. Every head instantly turned toward him, which he didn't like one bit. The veins on Bakugo's forehead popped, and the water around his clenched fists began to dangerously sizzle and bubble. What the hell are you all looking at me for? Exhibit B, DABI sighed, not even flinching at the threat of localized explosions. Bakugo, let's play out a scenario. A girl comes up to you, completely sincere, and confesses she has liked you for a long time. What's your move? The entire bath held its breath. Bakugo scoffed loudly, crossing his arms with enough force to send a wave across the pool. I would tell her to get the hell out of my face. If she's got time to waste on that romantic garbage, she should be spending it on extra reps. Love doesn't win battles, and I don't need some weak-ass anchor slowing me down. Another collective, synchronized facepalm echoed through the steam. Kirishima just shook his head, looking deeply mournful. Manly conviction, but totally unmanly execution, Bakugo. See, DABI pointed a lazy thumb at him. The guy views a romantic confession as a tactical ambush. If a girl ever manages to marry him, it will be because she challenged him to a deathmatch and won. You want to go, sensei? I will boil you alive in this tank. Bakugo roared, half rising out of the water before Kirishima and Kaminari frantically dragged him back down by his shoulders. And finally, DABI said, his eyes sliding over to the last target, his smirk widening. We have the final boss of romantic hopeless cases, Mr. Super Clueless. Midoriya, who had been trying to physically merge with the stone wall to escape notice, flinched violently as 19 pairs of eyes, plus little Koda's wide, intense stare, locked onto him. And me? Midoriya squeaked, his voice cracking a full octave. DABI-sensei, I don't think that's fair. I talk to girls. I talk to Uraraka-san and Hatsum-san all the time. Yeah, you talk to them about torque ratios, support gear specifications, and muscle mass distribution. DABI deadpanned, blowing a bit of steam out of his face. Kid, you have a girl who practically glows like a neon sign every time you step into a room, and your baseline response is to analyze her center of gravity. You can dodge a villain's attack pattern on pure, terrifying instinct, but the second a girl gives you a compliment, your brain short-circuits and you look like you're about to swallow your own tongue. Every boy in the water slowly turned to look at Midoriya, nodding in solemn, tragic agreement. It's true, Midoriya, Kaminari lamented. Sometimes it's painful to watch. Midoriya's face turned a shade of red that completely rivaled the hot spring's temperature. He sank down until the water reached his lower lip to hide his burning cheeks, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a terrifying, breathless second, his mind raced back to his internal monologue on the porch. Dodge on instinct.
Danger radar.
Did DABI-sensei know about danger sense? Midoriya looked closely at his teacher through the mist. DABI's eyes were closed again. His face relaxed in a lazy, mocking smirk. It was just a figure of speech. At least he thought it was. He was just making fun of his usual overanalytical battle habits. Midoriya let out a long, silent puff of air beneath the water, the sheer relief cooling his chest. Thank goodness. He doesn't know. All right, class dismissed, DABI announced, stretching his scarred arms over his head before gracefully sliding out of the pool. Go get some sleep, heroes. Tomorrow, the real hell begins. And you all already know I won't be this gentle when I am throwing you into the dirt. After DABI left, the boys stayed for a little while longer. Midoriya sat at the shallow edge of the boys' side, his legs dangling in the water, completely lost in thought. The recent incident at the shopping complex kept replaying in his mind. How close he had come to losing control, how helpless he had felt, and how effortlessly DABI-sensei had moved toward a threat that had frozen Midoriya entirely. "You're thinking too loud," Todoroki observed quietly, sliding into the water nearby. Midoriya blinked, snapping out of his daze. Just processing. The attack at the mall? Was it that obvious? Later, after the baths had cleared out, Midoriya found himself sitting on the lodge's back porch, staring out into the pitch-black horizon of the forest. The night air was crisp, a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat of the day. That's where Mandalay found him. "Can't sleep?" she asked, stepping onto the wooden deck and settling down beside him. "Too much on my mind, I guess," Midoriya admitted, offering a faint, tired smile. Mandalay looked at him out of the corner of her eye, studying his profile. "You know, for a kid your age, it looks like you've already gone through some incredibly tough times." It wasn't a superficial observation. She had been thinking about it ever since the afternoon. Specifically, the terrifying, split-second shift in his eyes when Kota had tried to ambush him. Those weren't the reflexes of a sheltered student. Midoriya chuckled softly, shaking his head. "No, it's not like that. Honestly, I have had it a lot easier than many of the people I know. In fact, I think I am incredibly lucky. I have so many amazing people to rely on, and despite everything, I am finally walking the exact path I always wanted to." Mandalay didn't know enough of his background to push the issue, so she simply let his humble denial slide. Midoriya turned to her, his expression turning serious as a question that had been bothering him all evening finally surfaced. "Mandalay, I just don't understand one thing about Kota." "What's that?" "If DABI-sensei saved his parents and DABI is a hero, why does Kota hate heroes so much now?" Mandalay's expression sobered, her gaze drifting out toward the darkened trees. "It's not exactly that he hates heroes across the board. It's more that he despises incompetence. Or rather, he learned a very harsh truth the day his parents were attacked." She paused, wrapping her arms around her knees. Kota was actually there when it happened. He saw with his own eyes how his parents, two licensed pros, were completely overwhelmed. And then he watched a teenager, someone who hadn't even graduated high school yet, step in and do what the adults couldn't. Mandalay looked directly at Midoriya, her eyes reflecting the starlight. He experienced what absolute, uncompromised heroism looked like firsthand. He completely idolized DABI for it. But the downside to witnessing something that is perfect so early in life is that nothing else ever measures up. To Kota, standard heroes look like people playing a safe, commercialized game. Midoriya absorbed her words, the puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. "So when he called us wannabes, he is measuring you against the only standard he knows," Mandalay said softly, pushing herself up to a stand and dusting off her clothes. "He's testing to see if you're actually serious about putting your lives on the line, or if you're just kids playing dress-up." 5:30 a.m. The mountainside was swallowed by a punishing, freezing fog. Aizawa's voice cutting through the lodge speakers was entirely devoid of human empathy. "Every student on the clearing in 5 minutes. If you are late, you start the week behind." When Class 1A assembled, they weren't the raw, unpolished kids who had stepped onto UA campus months ago. Under DABI's unhinged, high-intensity routine, their combat reflexes had sharpened into lethal weapons. They looked dangerous, but they also looked exhausted. Bakugo stood with his arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight the tendons in his neck strained. Midoriya was bouncing on his toes, his eyes clear but hyper-focused, his body humming with a strange, tightly coiled tension. Once again, DABI was nowhere to be seen. Quirk Baseline Assessment, Aizawa announced, holding up a digital tracker. Over the last few months, your tactical efficiency, combat awareness, and reaction times have grown at an astonishing rate. DABI's drills forced your bodies to adapt. But today we are measuring raw, unmitigated capacity. Bakugo, step up. Redo the pitch from the first day of school. Bakugo ripped the softball from Aizawa's hand. He didn't waste time boasting. He dropped into a perfect low center stance, wound his shoulder back, and unleashed a concentrated, terrifyingly precise blast that tore the fog completely out of the air. The device beeped. Aizawa turned the screen toward the class. 1,204.3 meters. Whoa! Kaminari yelled, his eyes widening. Over 1,200 meters. That's almost double your first score. Bakugo, don't get ahead of yourselves. Aizawa cut in, his voice cold as he shut off the screen. Look at the data closely. Bakugo, your physical strength has increased, your stance is flawless, and your AP shot compression allows you to eliminate air resistance. That massive leap in distance? It's entirely due to mechanical efficiency. You've learned how to spend every single drop of fuel in your tank without wasting an ounce of energy. Aizawa stepped closer, his piercing gaze sweeping over the class. But the actual size of your fuel tank? The maximum amount of sweat your glands can produce before failing? Hasn't grown an inch. DABI taught you how to use your quirk with perfect, lethal efficiency. But efficiency only gets you so far in a prolonged war of attrition. This week, we aren't learning technique. We are forcing your bodies to produce more raw power. We are breaking the glass to build a bigger reservoir. Listen up, 1A. Vlad King boomed as Class 1B filed out into the clearing. My class is here to close the gap. If you think your early combat experience gives you a permanent edge, you're mistaken. But the competitive smirk on Monoma's face died the moment he saw 1A's specialized layout. This wasn't standard training. DABI had already refined their basic mechanics. Aizawa and the Pussycats were here to break their biological caps. Because Todoroki could already swap elements flawlessly thanks to DABI's prior conditioning, his new torment was entirely different. He wasn't just regulating his internal thermostat anymore. He was forced to use his fire to superheat Pixie Bob's massive earth golem from the inside out, while simultaneously drawing the heat out of his own blood with his right side to prevent internal combustion. Nearby, Bakugo was outfitted with heavy support gauntlets that actively restricted his sweat flow, forcing him to manually trigger explosions against the hydraulic pressure of the equipment. Every blast rattled the valley, forcing his sweat glands to violently expand under severe internal resistance. These lunatics are freaking annoying, Monoma muttered, his jaw dropping as a concussive shockwave nearly took his legs out. Tokoyami, center stage. Tiger boomed, stepping into a terrifyingly heavy stance. Dark shadow emerged, immediately shrinking under the harsh morning glare. The light caps my output, sensei. We aren't looking for brute strength today. Aizawa cut in, his eyes flashing a dangerous crimson. DABI noted your mobility is entirely linear. You rely on dark shadow to drag you horizontally, but its composition isn't bound by gravity. Dark shadow wrap his torso. The shadow beast complied, coiling like a heavy snake around Tokoyami's chest. Now, Tiger roared, throwing a massive, bone-shattering punch directly at Tokoyami's face. Don't pull him away. Compress your density into the earth and force a vertical lift. Malleable mass can achieve flight. On pure survival instinct, Dark Shadow shrieked. Its lower half flattened against the dirt like a high-tension spring before violently expanding upward. The concussive release launched Tokoyami 30 feet straight into the air, entirely breaking his gravity-bound limits. He hovered, completely unstable for a fraction of a second, before dropping into an active defensive descent. Again, Tiger yelled, bracing for the next impact. Learn to mold the air pressure beneath you. Defy gravity. On the other side of the clearing, Midoriya was facing a different kind of hell. He was standing completely still in the center of an erratic, high-speed bombardment from Pixie Bob's Earth Beasts. He wasn't using full cowling to smash them. His eyes were clamped shut, his knuckles whitening as he tried to force a spark from his second quirk. Come on, Midoriya thought through gritted teeth. Just fire. Do what you did with Koda. Whack! An earthen fist clipped his shoulder, sending him tumbling through the dirt. He scrambled up, panting, frustration peaking. Ever since that split-second activation at the lodge, danger sense had gone completely dormant. He couldn't force it to trigger. Your mind is too loud, Midoriya. Aizawa barked from the perimeter, scanning his vitals. You're treating a subconscious survival reflex like a conscious command. Stop trying to find the trigger and let your instincts do the heavy lifting. Midoriya wiped blood from his lip, his green eyes flashing with an intense, quiet frustration. He had a secondary weapon locked inside his own head, and right now the lock wouldn't budge. From a high cliff edge above the smoke, a silent little boy watched every single broken stone and brutal fall, his eyes locked onto Midoriya's trembling form. By 4:00 p.m., the camp was an absolute war zone of melted stone and shattered ice. Dinner was an unceremonious affair of self-prepared curry. Todoroki, whose thermal control was now hyper-precise after a day of lethal regulation, lit the entire row of cooking pits with a lazy, perfectly calculated flick of his left index finger. Koda walked through the camp, his small hands shoved deep into his pockets. He didn't sneer or run away this time. His eyes simply scanned the raw, visible burns on Bakugo's forearms and the massive, trembling fatigue dragging at Midoriya's legs. He had grown up believing heroes were just flashy public figures, but watching them bleed in the dark, away from the cameras and the applause, painted a completely different, heavy reality. Later that evening, Midoriya spotted the small boy sitting alone on the northern overlook, staring down at the glowing lights of the lodge. Quietly, Midoriya climbed up, holding a steaming bowl of curry. Brought you some, Midoriya said gently, settling onto the dirt beside him. Koda didn't yell. He slowly turned his head, his gaze transitioning from the food to the dark purple bruising on Midoriya's shoulder. Why do you do that to yourselves? Koda asked, his voice carrying an unnaturally mature weight. Train until your bones shake, and fight until you collapse. Midoriya stayed quiet, letting him speak. Koda's fists clenched tight against his knees. I just didn't understand why anyone would willingly choose a life that breaks them. Today, I watched all of you. You're actually trying to become like DABI, like the people who stand between the monsters and the rest of the world. But it looks so miserable. Why torture yourself for a world that doesn't even see how much you're bleeding in the dark? Midoriya looked down at his heavily scarred right hand, flexing his fingers against the permanent, deep ache of one for all. Until a few months ago, Midoriya said softly, a nostalgic smile touching his lips. I didn't have a quirk at all, Koda. I was completely ordinary. Everyone told me to look at reality and choose a safe path. Koda's breath hitched slightly. A hero without power? Yeah, sounds impossible, right? Midoriya chuckled, his gaze drifting to the stars. But even when I was terrified, and even when people laughed, every time I saw someone crying, or every time a shadow loomed over someone who couldn't protect themselves, my legs would move before I could even think. It wasn't about a grand title. I just couldn't bear the thought of letting someone face the dark alone. He turned to Koda, his green eyes radiating an unbreakable, quiet intensity that made the little boy freeze. Your parents didn't choose that life because they wanted to suffer, Coda. They looked at the people in this valley, looked at you, and decided your peace was worth every single scar they would ever take. They weren't playing a safe game, and neither are we. Midoriya stood up, dusting the dirt from his uniform and leaving the warm bowl of curry right where it was. We train this hard because when the night comes, and the monsters actually show up, we want to be strong enough to make sure the people we protect never have to see how hard it was to save them. He offered a small, reassuring nod before turning back down the mountain path, leaving Coda alone on the cliffside with the sudden, staggering weight of what true heroism actually meant. Meanwhile, where was DABI this whole time? He hadn't stayed behind in Mizudafu, and he certainly wasn't lounging in some staff room. There was no way in hell he was leaving his students exposed out in the mountains when he already knew the impending villain strike. He was out there in the dense treeline. But for all his calculation, an unfamiliar, irritating knot of unease was tightening in his chest. He couldn't shake the question of how to handle what was coming. Did he step back, trust the grueling training he had put them through, and leave them to smother the smaller fires on their own? Or was that the exact kind of naive arrogance that would make him regret the choice for the rest of his life? All for One didn't play by a syllabus. As DABI's eyes scanned the smoky clearing from the shadows, his gaze lingered on Midoriya, who was currently taking a brutal bruising from Pixie Bob's constructs. He watched the kid's microscopic twitches, the sudden, hyperreactive shifts in his center of gravity right before a strike landed. He has unlocked it, DABI thought, a dry, cynical smirk touching his lips. He had already fully put the pieces together the previous night in the hot springs when the kid practically tried to bury himself alive in the water after a stray comment. Midoriya had a second quirk now, some kind of hardwired danger radar. DABI leaned back against the bark of a massive pine, crossing his arms as his blue eyes narrowed through the leaves. The kid was still trying to force it open with his mind, acting like a typical overanalytical nerd. He had no idea his teacher had already clocked the anomaly. DABI leaned his back against the bark of a massive pine, his blue eyes cutting through the thick mountain mist to lock onto Yuga Aoyama. He had been watching the kid since the moment the buses rolled out. How does he do it? The location of this camp was a strict, high-level secret, withheld from the students until their actual arrival. On top of that, their phones had been confiscated the second they stepped onto the camp. So how the hell were the villains going to tip the board? Does the kid have a built-in GPS tracker in that ridiculous belt, or what? DABI thought, his mind cycling through absurd theories to fill the gaps. According to everything he had pieced together about All for One's network, Aoyama didn't have a direct, magical line to the Demon Lord. In almost every scenario, his civilian parents acted as the mediators. But there was no way a couple of terrified socialites were executing a real-time tracking leak from Tokyo to an isolated mountain range in the middle of nowhere, which meant Aoyama was either carrying a burner phone or some kind of microtransmitter was hidden right on his person. DABI had monitored him like a hawk during the hot springs and through the night. The kid hadn't done a single suspicious thing. He was just sweating, looking green around the gills, and staring at his boots. But DABI had already made up his mind. It was time to deal with Aoyama. Finally, he had no intention of dragging this reluctant student traitor drama out any longer than necessary. He had already delayed it far too long. But the real headache wasn't catching the kid. It was handling the aftermath. DABI had zero intention of hiding the truth from the rest of Class 1A. Aoyama was going to face the raw, unvarnished consequences of the path he had taken, whether he was forced into it or not. I don't hate the brat, DABI admitted to himself, watching Aoyama fumble with his sparkling naval laser. But he's going to get disciplined, even if I have to break him a little to fix him. Down on the clearing, the afternoon sun beat down like a physical weight, but the pace didn't slow. Aizawa was moving through the roster with a lethal, hyper-efficient stride, entirely skipping the basic conditioning to force immediate evolution. Ashido, Aizawa barked, his scarf drifting as he watched her dance around Pixie Bob's constructs. Your acid viscosity is perfectly stabilized, but your volume spray is a waste of stamina. Stop painting the field. Compress the stream into localized, high-pressure armor-piercing rounds. Target the joints. Zero. He shifted his focus without pausing for breath. Your tape output is maxed out. Your issue is deployment speed. If you can't anchor and swing within a half-second window, a high-tier villain will cut your line before you clear the dirt. Double your retraction rate. Sato, the sugar rush burnout is a structural failure. You're overloading your system all at once. Learn to microdose the intake to maintain a steady, baseline enhancement instead of crashing. Kirishima, your unbreakable form is dense enough to take a tank shell, but you're dropping it the second the concussive shock passes. Maintain the hardened state through the impact. Absorb and counter. He stopped directly in front of Mina, Tokoyami, and Kaminari, his eyes narrowing. Kaminari, you're still relying on that brain-frying max discharge because you're lazy. Your current assignment is to channel your voltage exclusively through your support pointers to create a localized stun grid. If you short-circuit your own brain today, you're doing 500 push-ups with Tiger sitting on your back. Yes, sir, Kaminari squeaked, his hands trembling as he tried to regulate his current. It was deep into the night when it finally happened. The sweltering heat of the summer day had lingered into the evening air, but the sweat pouring down Aoyama's face felt entirely different from the exhaustion of the other students. It was the cold, suffocating sweat of sheer terror. He followed the strict instructions he had received from his parents, gripping the sterile burner phone smuggled to him before the camp. 9 p.m. A one-way, prearranged window. Just a brief exchange of landmarks and coordinates, with his parents acting as the terrified intermediaries for the Demon Lord. It was a flawless, desperate protocol, and DABI watched every single second of it from the branches above. The moment the call ended, Aoyama lowered the phone, his hands trembling violently. But as he turned to walk back toward the lodge, the air around him grew completely frigid. DABI dropped from the tree line, landing silently in the dirt. His face looked drained, his blue eyes staring past Aoyama into the dark brush with a heavy, uncharacteristic tiredness. Sigh, what a disaster, DABI muttered, his voice dripping with genuine disappointment as he looked in a seemingly random direction. I did say I intended to reveal this to you guys eventually, but I would have definitely preferred a different situation. Aoyama froze, his breath catching violently in his throat. His panicked mind scrambled to understand a single thing DABI was talking about. Reveal? To whom? There were only two of them out here in the dead of night. Him and DABI. But then, underneath the rustle of the leaves, his ears caught it. A faint, muffled crying voice coming from the shadows. While his mind began to scream, completely refusing to accept the reality that his secret had been shattered into pieces right in front of him. Sensei. Aoyama stammered, his voice cracking into a broken, terrified whisper as he backed away. Just that. Had no choice. They will kill my parents. DABI just took a slow step forward. In a blind, panicked surge of adrenaline, Aoyama's survival instincts took over. Forgive me, he shrieked. The ring of his belt ignited, firing a sudden, blinding beam of his naval laser directly at DABI's chest. DABI didn't even flinch. With a fluid, practiced motion, he simply brought his raw hand up, swatting the concentrated beam aside on pure reflex. The deflected laser bounced violently off his palm, losing most of its momentum as it crashed into the dark woods. But as the stray light tore through the brush, a sharp, muffled gasp echoed in the air, followed by a shaky, choked sob. DABI's eyes narrowed instantly, as he had clocked a faint anomaly in the perimeter minutes ago. But he had been a second too late to intercept it. Stepping in to block her would have meant letting the traitor bolt into the dark. When the laser cut through the shadows, Toru Hagikure's appearance was abruptly dragged into the light. Her invisibility quirk naturally refracted light to keep her hidden, but the intense, sudden exposure to Aoyama's high-output laser caused her quirk factor to violently glitch. For a raw, uncovered second, the refraction shattered, revealing the distinct profile of her face. Her wide, expressive teal and yellow eyes and thick, bushy eyelashes catching the fading light. "Sensei, I did keep an eye on him as you asked me to, but I never thought that it would be something like this." She was standing paralyzed in the brush, tears streaming down her half-visible cheeks, her face twisted into a look of absolute, soul-crushing betrayal. "Aoyama." "Oh." Toru's voice trembled, breaking completely as her visibility flickered. Aoyama collapsed to his knees, the burner phone slipping from his fingers. He covered his face, his sparkling persona completely dissolving into pathetic, ragged wails. "I am sorry. I am so sorry, Toru. I never wanted any of this." DABI stood over them, the silence of the forest heavy and suffocating. He picked up the discarded burner phone. Meanwhile, in the forest, unseen by students or heroes, the Vanguard Action Squad had gathered. The specific coordinates had only been delivered a few minutes ago through All for One's network, but they were already in position, melting out of the shadows like ghosts. "This is going to be so much fun. I can't wait to see them all panicking." "Hey, new guy, focus," Magnus snapped, his tone laced with a hostile, warning edge. "We have one objective tonight: capture Bakugo. Everything else is secondary." The person he was directing his hostility toward was definitely an anomaly, someone DABI would not recognize as part of the core league of villains. The boy was freakishly tall, standing around 7 feet, but he was unervingly lean. His body proportions didn't make a lick of sense, looking more like a stretched shadow than a man. Strapped to his back was a bizarre, oversized basket filled with rows of glossy, dense black balls that hummed with a faint, static tension. The new recruit simply tilted his head, his silent, obscured gaze fixed on the glowing lights of the distant lodge. "I still think we should kill a few," Muscular rumbled, cracking his massive knuckles. "Send a real message to the public." Mr. Compress adjusted his mask, his top hat catching the faint moonlight. "Let us maintain our theatrical grace, shall we? Splendid execution requires timing. We should begin soon." Magna grinned, her grip tightening on her massive magnet weapon. "Finally, I was getting bored waiting around in these damp woods. My poison will incapacitate most of them before they can even react," Mustard muttered, checking the seals on his gas canisters and pulling his gas mask tightly over his face. "They won't even know they're breathing it in." Moonfish's mechanical blades clicked together hungrily, his heavily bound body twitching in the brush. "Flesh? Fresh flesh. Show me the meat." As the squad began to scatter into their designated attack positions, Muscular lingered in the thickest part of the shadows, a dark, vicious smile spreading across his face. The League had their orders, but nobody needed to know he had his own personal plans for one particular green-haired student. The silence in the forest was absolute, suffocating, broken only by the ragged, pathetic sobs echoing from the dirt. Yuga Aoyama was on his knees, the pristine, sparkling facade he had worn since the first day of UA completely shattered. A few feet away, Toru Hagikure's light-refracting invisibility flickered erratically, her tears catching the pale moonlight as she stared at the boy she had called a classmate. DABI stood over them, the heavy, dark canopy of the beast's forest swallowing the ambient light. He was the one who asked Toru Hagikure to keep an eye on her during the whole summer camp. For him, He is the best spy to keep tabs on Yuga Aoyama without notifying him. At his boots lay the cheap, black burner phone Aoyama had dropped. The screen was cracked, and the transmission icon had already faded. And as he wanted, their location has already been revealed. DABI simply reached into his vest and pulled out his secure, encrypted earpiece and put it into his ear. He tapped the comms channel linked directly to the lodge. "Shota," DABI said, his voice flat, carrying the lethal calm of a man watching a bomb's timer tick down to 0. "Our location is compromised." Inside the lodge, a mile down the valley, Aizawa Shoyuta had been standing in the dimly lit staff kitchen pouring his third coffee of the night. The moment DABI's voice crackled through the earpiece, the mug stopped halfway to his mouth. Aizawa's exhaustion vanished instantly, replaced by the bone-deep, icy focus of the underground hero. "What?" Aizawa's voice was a low, jagged whisper in DABI's ear. "Are you certain?" "I am looking at the leak right now," DABI replied, his turquoise eyes fixed on Aoyama's trembling form. "The coordinates were just broadcasted." "Understood." Aizawa shifted into immediate operational command. "I will wake the Pussycats and Vlad. We will immediately prepare the students for departure. I can have the buses loaded in 10 minutes. "There is no time for the buses, Shota," DABI interrupted, his gaze shifting from the terrified French student to the pitch-black tree line surrounding them. His spider sense hummed at the base of his skull, an electric warning of impending violence. "They will probably be here in a few more minutes." How was DABI so sure? Because his spidey sense had already picked up a disturbance coming from the northeast. There was a fraction of a second of dead air on the comms. How is that even logically possible? Aizawa demanded, the raw disbelief bleeding through the encrypted channel. "We have their transporter locked in a vault at Tartarus." DABI hadn't explicitly mentioned that the location had likely been leaked to the League of Villains, but at this point they were the only group he could realistically imagine attempting something like this. There was also a harder edge beneath Aizawa's voice, the kind reserved for people who made his friends suffer even after death. But he didn't let his anger cloud his judgment. For now, the safety of the students was the top priority. While what he stated was also true, Kurogiri, the League's mist-based teleporter, was currently strapped to a high-tech restraint chair 500 meters below sea level, heavily sedated and muzzle-locked. Without his warp gates, the League of Villains possessed no rapid deployment capabilities. Moving an entire strike force into an uncharted mountain range should have taken days of logistical planning. "It's all for one," DABI replied, the name alone seeming to drop the temperature in the forest. Just hearing the name seemed to make the forest feel colder. Over the past few days, following the revelation of Kurogiri's true identity, both All Might and DABI had decided Aizawa needed to know more about the enemy they were dealing with. Not everything. The truth about One for All remained carefully guarded, as did the details surrounding All Might's inherited power. But Aizawa had been told enough. He knew about All Might's emaciated form and the devastating injury that had ended the symbol of Peace's prime. More importantly, he now knew that there had always been someone standing on the opposite side of that conflict. A monster who had operated from the shadows for generations, and he was called All for One. The mastermind who had built an empire of villains while remaining almost invisible to the world. At first, Aizawa had thought the story sounded absurd. Then he had seen the evidence. Now, hearing DABI speak the name in connection with the current situation, he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Because if All for One was personally involved, then nothing about this operation could be considered normal. If we think a century-old demon relies on a single parlor trick to move his pawns, we will be underestimating the devil. I think they still have their other ways. Whether it was a specialized mudwarp quirk, a cloaked aerial drop, or a secondary bioengineered asset, the method no longer mattered. The Vanguard Action Squad was in the woods. In the lodge, Aizawa set his coffee mug down on the counter. His knuckles were white as he thought of the exhausted teenagers sleeping in the rooms upstairs. Kids who had spent the last 2 days destroying their own muscles to break their biological limits under DABI's unhinged training. They were battered, bruised, and completely asleep. "What do you suggest then, DABI?" Aizawa asked. It wasn't a surrender of authority but a genuine inquiry from one veteran to another who currently had eyes on the field. DABI didn't hesitate because in a way he was the one who built this situation. "Wake them up," he commanded, his voice cold and absolute. "Prepare the students for battle." Aizawa closed his eyes, and the weight of that order was staggering. As a teacher, his instinct was to shield his students, to hide them away from the monsters lurking in the dark. But as a pro-hero who had watched those same kids stand their ground at the USJ, who knew the brutal reality of the world they were stepping into, he knew DABI was right. If they ran blindly into the dark now, they would be hunted down one by one. "I will be on it," Aizawa finally replied, his voice hardening into steel. "We will hold the lodge. Don't die out there in the dark, DABI." DABI said softly, "Just take care of any strays that might have slipped by." He cut the connection, and the silence of the forest rushed back in, heavy and oppressive. DABI glanced down. Aoyama was still on his knees, sobbing into his hands, completely overwhelmed by the weight of his betrayal and the terrifying presence of the man standing over him. A few meters away, Toru Hagakure remained frozen in the brush. Her usual energy and chatter had vanished, replaced by stunned silence. She was still trying to process everything that had happened. Although she had heard the conversation, most of it had gone completely over her head. The names, accusations, and implications, none of it made any sense to her yet. DABI crouched down smoothly, bringing himself to Aoyama's eye level. He picked up the burner phone and held it out. "Aoyama," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that cut straight through the boy's frantic sobbing. Aoyama flinched violently, his tear-streaked face snapping up. He looked at DABI with the wide, doomed eyes of a rabbit caught in a snare. "Sensei, please," Aoyama choked out, his aristocratic persona entirely dissolved into raw, pathetic terror. "I had no choice. My parents, I don't care about your parents right now," DABI said, his tone devoid of either sympathy or anger. He tossed the cracked burner phone into Aoyama's lap. "You just invited the wolves into our home. Your masters think they have the element of surprise walking into a camp full of sleeping victims." DABI leaned in closer. His turquoise eyes caught the pale moonlight, gleaming with a dark, predatory anticipation. "Don't even think about trying anything," DABI ordered, his voice cold and slicing deep into Aoyama's conscience. "Keep your mouth shut, stay exactly where you are told to, and don't move. I will deal with you after this is over." Aoyama swallowed hard, his breath hitching as he stared at the scarred man before him. "Let them walk into the trap," DABI finished, standing back up in one fluid motion. The spy stared up at him in absolute awe and terror. He had spent his entire life fearing the shadow of All for One, believing that the demon lord of the underworld was an omnipotent, unbeatable force. But looking at DABI and the chilling, meticulous composure of an underground hero who had deliberately lured a strike force of elite killers into the mountains just to slaughter them on his own terms, Aoyama realized something profound. The villains weren't the scariest things in these woods tonight. "Hagakure," DABI called out without turning his head. The invisible girl jumped, her refracted outline shifting nervously in the brush. "Yes, Sensei." "Grab this idiot by the collar and haul him back to the lodge," DABI instructed, his gaze already shifting toward the thickest part of the tree line. "Aizawa is locking the building down. Tell the pussycats that the Vanguard squad is here. Stick together, And if you see anything move in the shadows that isn't wearing a UA uniform, you don't hesitate. You run or you fight to kill. What about you, Sensei? Agakure asked, her voice trembling as she stepped out of the brush and grabbed Aoyama's arm, hauling the weeping boy to his feet. Blue fire flickered to life across Dabi's knuckles, casting a ghostly, ethereal glow against the trunks of the ancient pines. The temperature in the clearing spiked instantly, burning away the damp mountain humidity. Me? Dabi asked, a jagged, terrifying smile spreading across his face. In the distance, the first faint sound of breaking timber echoed through the valley. I am going hunting. Genetic milestone system, 3 evolution paths, breath of the sun, 100 out of 100%. Super soldier, 100 out of 100%. Arachnid genome, 41 to 69, out of 100%. Lifespan left, 120 plus years.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going. Plus, it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.